No entiendo de lo que está hablando. ¿Tú sí?
Ella está hablando de la anexión de Roseland y cómo nos va a afectar.
¿Va a subir mis impuestos de propiedad?
No. Shh.
¿Estás seguro?
Sí. Shh.
Ok, bien, porque ahorita muchos de mis activos están atados en bienes raíces.
Today we're going to talk about the annexation of Roseland to the city of Santa Rosa.
I don't get what she's talking about, do you?
She's talking about the annexation of Roseland and how it will affect us.
Will it make my property taxes go up?
No. Shh.
Are you sure?
Yes. Shh.
Cool, because most of my assets are currently tied up in real estate.
Santa Rosa, out there in the middle of everything.
Over 90 miles of creeks run through Santa Rosa. Runoff from streets, roofs, and parking lots end up in our creeks through the storm drain system. To help protect creeks, keep your street gutters and roadside ditches clear of trash and other pollutants. For more information on the benefits of our creeks and tips on how to enjoy them, visit the Stormwater and Creeks webpage.
You still texting?
I gotta let daycare know that I'm running late. They charge if you're late. And I'm not usually one of those people to text and drive, and I was almost done with my text when that car came out of nowhere.
You still veered in oncoming traffic. And that text message, it never got through.
One text or call could wreck it all.
You still texting?
Busy. Where we at?
County morgue?
Not on my schedule.
You scheduled it when you T-boned that minivan and sent 2 people to the hospital. Guess you was paying more attention to that thing than the road.
Making sure my wife picks up my suit.
Sounds like a text message that just couldn't wait.
Texting and driving. A killer combination.
You still texting?
Is this a real morgue?
Yep.
Shut up. Like with real dead people. Ooh, I gotta text Ashley.
Ashley identified you when you wrapped your car around that light pole because you was caring more about that thing than the road.
I knew she liked me.
Not anymore.
No text message is worth a life.
I wanna feel the sun, have barbecues. I wanna see my friends, the old and new. We'll turn on the game and share some laughs, and we'll play listen that. Now say goodbye to rainy days, to the golden nights and the empty trees. Now full of life and colors new, and it's all here for you to see. Cloudless skies, summer days, feels just like it's on the way. Kids are out, safe to play, and it feels just like a beautiful.
September 5th, meeting of the Santa Rosa City Council. Where are we? Ms. Gomez, would you announce the roll?
Let the record show that all council members are present.
And we do have a proclamation today. Mr. Schwedhelm, you have that one.
Thank you, Mayor Corsi. Is Jennifer Piccinini, correct? Could you introduce yourself first before I read the proclamation so we all...
Sure. I'm Jennifer Piccinini with the Stormwater and Creeks team in the Water Department.
Great, thank you. So proclamation reads, whereas throughout the United States, the week starting on the third Monday of September is recognized as National Pollution Prevention Week, and whereas throughout much of California, including the Russian River watershed, cities, counties, and other stewardship organizations, are recognizing the fourth week of September as Creek Week, and whereas our pollution prevention practices are intrinsically linked to the health of our watershed land and waterways, and whereas the City of Santa Rosa supports programs to reduce pollution, increase the environmental quality of our watershed, and provide our communities with the knowledge to be effective stewards of the Russian River watershed lands and waterways, and whereas the nearly 1,500 square miles of lands, 238 creeks, and approximately 350,000 residents of the Russian River watershed are connected and mutually support each other, making the Russian River, along with its tributaries and associated features, important resources to the people of Sonoma and Mendocino counties. And whereas pollution in the form of trash and debris, chemicals from industry and everyday living, and sediment from construction and many land uses and activities all have the potential to degrade the quality of life and the quality of resources within the Russian River watershed. And whereas the City of Santa Rosa, through our stormwater management program, strives to protect our lands and waterways through ongoing pollution prevention outreach, which aims to raise awareness of the harmful effects of pollutants to our natural systems. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Chris Corsi, Mayor of the City of Santa Rosa, on behalf of the entire City Council, does hereby proclaim the week of September 18 through 24, 2017 as Pollution Prevention Week, and the week of September 16 through 24, 2017 as Creek Week in the City of Santa Rosa, and ask all members of our communities to support efforts to protect and enrich our watershed health by participating in the many Pollution Prevention Week, Creek Week activities, and to take active steps to reduce pollution and care for our environment throughout the year.
Thank you. I'm here to just give you a quick update on this year's plans for Creek Week. We're hosting a Creek to Coast cleanup of Santa Rosa Creek on Saturday, September 16th, down at the Olive Park Footbridge. Meet at 9:30. I hope you can join us. And I brought each of you a flyer and a copy of our new Creek Trails map, which has been really successful. It's new. And we've distributed almost 5,000 of them and are getting ready for a reprint. So we're pretty excited about that. And this year, we're tapping in on the power of our social media. We're encouraging people to pick up a Creek Trails map at any city office, choose a creek to visit, and submit a selfie with one of our Ours to Protect Creek name signs for an Instagram photo contest. We've filmed a green car wash video that'll debut on Facebook during that week, along with some other pollution prevention related messages. We have a website for any Creek Week activities. It's called srcity.org, Creek to Coast. Are there any questions?
Any questions, Council? Congratulations and thank you for your efforts on this.
Great, thank you.
I got a little ahead of myself. Report on closed session.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The council gave on item 2.1, the council gave direction to legal counsel. On item 2.2 was withdrawn from the calendar and will be rescheduled at a later date.
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher. There are no staff briefings today. City Manager, do you have any report?
Nothing to report.
Ms. Gallagher, anything from you?
I just want to mention that we did receive the signed settlement agreement in the matter of CVSR. and that is on your agenda under communications to council. As you know, we very strongly believe there was no merit to the claim, but because of the very high costs of proceeding in the litigation and proceeding to trial, we did reach a settlement.
Thank you. Any statements of abstention from council members tonight? Mr. Tibbetts.
I'll be abstaining from, I believe it's item 12.1 on the consent calendar, the extension of proclamation of local homeless emergency.
Thank you. Mayors and council members' reports. Start at this end. Nothing. Down here, Mr. Rogers.
Just two quick things. One, I had a chance to go out to the annual Labor Day pancake breakfast yesterday, listening to a couple of our federal and state elected officials chiming in on what's been happening and celebrating the workers around the community. Also had a chance last week to help facilitate and mediate a conversation between the Department of Developmental Services, the North Bay Regional Center, and the residents of Queen Anne and Happy Valley here in our community related to Sonoma Developmental Center constituents who are being moved into community placement as the developmental center goes away. I just wanted to throw out a special thank you to the Director of Developmental Services for coming all the way over from Sacramento to try to begin answering questions for neighbors on what that means, and just want to put it back out there as we've been getting emails and comments from neighbors that DDS has made a commitment that they will answer any question. So if you have it, please reach out and make sure that I have it so that I can get an answer for them.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. No report. Ms. Combs, do you have a report?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I had a wonderful experience with our partnership program. Went to the Roseland Elementary School and met their senators, which is what they call the representatives they elect from each classroom. And we had an excellent conversation about representative government, and I certainly see a group of future council members growing up there. They also had done before they met with me, a taste test in the cafeteria, because apparently the food in the cafeteria was a hot topic on their campus. So that was really a wonderfully pleasant experience. Last week, during the meeting, I requested to know what our plan was going into the rain coming in September. I'm going to repeat the request for the plan for September this week. I had a disabled woman contact me recently, and she lost her rental unit because the owner was foreclosed upon, so her rental was no longer available. She's been on the street a couple of days now. She has a good friend who is trying to help her reach out because her developmental disability is significant, making her quite vulnerable. And yet, it was explained to her that there would be no opening in Catholic Charities Shelter until September 15th. So I have an individual who I would have thought would rank fairly high on a VI SPDAT as disabled, vulnerable female alone on the streets at night, trying to find a place to stay. So I again am asking, having had the rejection of the safe parking of supervised temporary encampments on city property, and having the winter shelter apparently be full in use right now, I am eager to await what our plans are for the rainy season coming up, because I know we have folks out there with significant need and high vulnerability index that we are not able to serve at this time. Just trying to figure out what our plans are. Thank you.
No report. Thank you. I have a couple things I wanted to mention. On Thursday, we hosted the former mayor's luncheon, and a couple former mayors who sit up here attended, as well as about a dozen other former mayors. Going back to Bob Tuttle, who was mayor of Santa Rosa in 1964 and 1965, more than 50 years ago. A lot of remarkable institutional memory in that room, and it was a very nice event, and I want to thank the staff for putting that together. Other item is that I understand that there are now 2 zip cars available in Santa Rosa, and you can get your free zip car membership at zipcar.com/Santa Rosa. Finally, once again, the actions of the administration in Washington, D.C. compel me to remind our community that this council does not agree with many of the policies and positions of our president, and particularly the part of his agenda that targets and scapegoats our immigrant populations. Attacking the DACA law and targeting dreamers in particular is a strange way to fix our broken immigration policies. Children brought to this country by their parents had no choice in that decision and no understanding of the legal ramifications of crossing the border. I don't believe they broke the law then, and by definition, dreamers now are law-abiding residents in every way but their immigration status. I've seen estimates of 4,000 to 6,000 dreamers in Sonoma County. This morning, I heard that a single medical facility in this community employs 250 dreamers who are at risk of losing their work permits, their driver's license. All of these young people are valuable contributors to our community. They're students and activists and parents and business owners, volunteers and neighbors. They're our employees and they're our friends. In Santa Rosa, we value these residents. We are an indivisible city, and we stand with them to demand that Congress quickly agree on a solution that allows them to remain in the only country that they know as home. Thank you. We'll move on to approval of the August 15th minutes. And are there any additions or questions to those minutes?
Based on your statement just a moment ago, do you want as mayor to write a letter? And do you want us to bring that topic up?
As mayor today, I've signed a letter from the U.S. Conference of Mayors, a letter to Congress urging immediate legislation to address this. For now, I think that that will be sufficient. And I did want to add, and thank you for reminding me that I wasn't finished, that apparently there's a rally at Courthouse Square at 5 p.m. on this issue. Can we show the minutes of August 15th approved as submitted? Thank you. We'll move on to the consent calendar. Mr. McGlynn.
Item 12.1, resolution extension of proclamation of local homeless emergency. Item 12.2, resolution sole source contract for multi-space parking meter software parts communication reporting and repair service with Kale America Incorporated.
Council, any questions on either of these items? Mr. Tibbetts.
I had a quick question on item 12.1, and the link is fuzzy, but I'm hoping it's there so I can bring it up. But I was curious if you had a status update on the donation meters for downtown.
That's 12.2.
The link is fuzzy, and I will. We can provide the update at in the future, but we're not at the moment.
Okay.
Okay. I do have one card on this, Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, sir. My name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland.
Hold on just one second for the microphone. There you go.
Thank you, sir. My name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. In Roseland, we have a homeless encampment on county-owned land that has anywhere between 25 and 28 people on a continuing basis. It's been there for 2 years now. And I believe that that type of a model could be undertaken at other sites in Santa Rosa. People may be hesitant at first, but it's really important that if we're going to recognize the homeless emergency for what it is, it's essentially not providing a space for people. And this space is working for those people that are there. There are many in the community who may wish it be elsewhere, but the point of it is there are thousands of people who need some space somewhere so that they can be safe and at least sheltered in tents. Most of the folks that are at this place, they now call it Camp Remembrance, stay in light weather tents that they have gotten themselves. And it's really a model in one sense in that the county has been picking up the cost of much of the services, yet will not claim it as a sanctioned camp. They pay for the water, they pay for the garbage, they pay for security, and they keep things together, but they don't want to use the word sanctioned, because then that will leave them, in a sense, accountable and responsible. So you folks have gone one step further at least. You've declared a homeless emergency. You're trying to get some positive things going. I'd like for you to ask the county to open up some of the spaces that they own, specifically the Sinead Road Community Hospital site, which the Sonoma County Grand Jury pointed out would be a good spot to have use of homeless there while they waited for it to be sold. And then the corner of Mendocino Avenue and Sinead Avenue, which is a large site and in the past has been used to sell Christmas trees and has sat vacant for numerous years and will sit vacant for more years. Apparently, the weather report for this coming week says there could even be a possibility of rain on Thursday. So I appreciate the folks on your council that are making efforts for this. Please reach out to the county and make an effort for the cure of the crisis to begin. Thank you so much for your time.
Any further questions or comments on these two items? In the absence of the Vice Mayor, I will move items 12.1 and 12.2 and wait for the reading of the text.
Second.
Your votes, please. This passed with 6 ayes. It not being 5 o'clock, we'll move on to item 14.1. Mr. City Manager.
Item 14.1, report to council direction to voting delegate for League of California Cities 2017 annual conference regarding council position on the resolutions becoming before the League General Assembly. Joshua Dameron, City Manager Fellow, presenting.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Corsi and members of the council. I'm here to present to you a quick report and to receive some direction for your voting delegate at the League of California Cities annual conference, which will be in Sacramento this next week. If any of you are going, then I wish you the best. So a little bit of background. So as you well know, policy development is a vital and ongoing process within the League of California Cities. The League of Cities has the principal means for deciding policy on important issues facing our cities today is through the League's 7 standing policy members and the board of directors. The process allows for timely consideration of the issues in changing environment and assures city officials the opportunity to both initiate and influence policy decisions. As I said before, this year's council is in Sacramento next week, and we have 2 resolutions going to the League for you to consider our support for. Excuse me. The first resolution is a resolution of the League of California Cities calling upon the governor and legislature to enter into discussion with League and other public safety stakeholders to identify and implement strategies that will reduce the unintended negative impacts of existing criminal law. This resolution seeks to address increases in crime in the wake of 3 recent changes to law. Those changes are AB 109, Proposition 47, and Proposition 57. AB 109 was approved in 2011 as a realignment within the criminal justice system. This action transferred nearly 45,000 felons from the state prison system to the local jail systems. This resulted in low-level criminals being released early. Proposition 47 was approved by California voters in 2014. It was originally known as the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, and it served to reclassify and downgrade a number of serious crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. Proposition 57 was approved in 2016. This proposition revised the rules of parole for what are designated nonviolent offenders under the California Penal Code. However, some of these criminal acts are violent in nature, or they may be committed to facilitate a violent outcome. An example of this would be discharging a firearm from a motor vehicle. This resolution would direct league staff to seek legislation expanding the term violent felony, to tighten the criteria for the release of nonviolent, non-serious, non-sex offender inmates, to mandate consideration of an inmate's entire criminal history as part of the deliberations involving whether to grant an individual parole, and to consider creation of a task force that would be charged with issuing a report recommending further changes in law. This resolution, the second resolution is a resolution of the League of California Cities supporting legislation amending Government Code Section 38611 to clarify the definition of local control, providing broad statutory authority for local officials to determine emergency service levels and direct emergency medical response within their jurisdictions. Cities have invested significant resources in building up and maintaining an independent emergency management system capability. This resolution seeks to amend Government Code Section 38611 to ensure that jurisdictions will be able to deploy their emergency management systems as needed for their community's needs. It's recommended that the Council take a position of support on each of these resolutions. Please note that the action of support is not actually committing the city to any specific action this time, any fiscal expenditures at this time. However, a vote of support from the council on these items would act to strengthen the League's position as they engage in discussions with the various stakeholders. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Council, questions on this item? I do have, go ahead, Mr. Tibbetts.
I do have a quick question on resolution number 1. What is the definition of tighten the criteria in regards to proposition? I believe it's 47. I mean, what in your mind or the city's opinion is loose about it? What needs correcting? What's causing the increase in crime?
Certainly. The police chief will be down in one moment to address that question.
Councilmember, I think like with Chief of Police, Rosa, like any conversations, when you talk about what it means, it's a kind of a moving target. For example, I'm on the California Chief of Police Legislative Committee. In one of these areas, shoplifting has become a huge issue in the grocery industry. So kind of figuring out what the balance is where minor offenses aren't ending up in state prison, yet we're dealing with the issues and getting them into services that they sometimes use through the criminal justice system to get to. So the answer to the question, where does it get tightened? It really becomes the negotiation point.
So I'm sorry, Chief, I don't mean to pin you down here with an answer necessarily, but is the suggestion there that, for example, in the case of a shoplifter, what are we proposing to do with somebody who's shoplifting when we catch them? Is it a misdemeanor still, or are we talking about?
It is still a misdemeanor. However, if you've had multiple convictions for shoplifting, it can be upgraded and it requires booking. Currently, we don't have that ability, and we have examples where we have actually issued citations for shoplifting multiple times in the same week for the same person.
Okay,
And
thanks.
this is some of the outcomes from the state legislators.
That's helpful. I will definitely be interested to see what materializes as a result of these conversations, but I'm, fully in support of having the conversation. Thank you.
Couple questions from me. I don't have any doubt that there are unintended consequences of statewide propositions dealing with crime. But these are propositions that were passed by the voters of California. And I've got some concern with the wording of the resolution from the League. This isn't from your report, Joshua, it's from the League. It says, whereas negative impacts from state legislative changes have been far-reaching and crime rates and the number of victims are skyrocketing throughout California. And I would like to know if that statement applies in Santa Rosa. Are we seeing crime rates and victims skyrocketing and that we can trace back to these three state laws?
I don't think skyrocketing is the word. Certainly we've seen increases in property crimes, but knowing that those are actually from historic lows. So even though we have seen some increases, which can be attributed to some of the propositions, specifically AB 109 in these areas, it's the wording that the League used in that particular area. Other communities certainly may feel it differently.
Thank you. Any other questions, Council? Yes, Mr. Rogers.
I was just curious if we know who actually wrote this.
In reference to the League's resolutions?
Yeah,
And
so-
the background analysis provided in the League packet?
Specifically the resolution. So my understanding of the process is at one of the previous conventions, a city council member would have had to have submitted it, it would have had to have passed to be able to move on. Do we know where this actually came from? And in particular, I'm going to follow the mayor on this one. I'm going to read right here. Whereas many probationers who have severe mental illness are released into communities where they continue to commit crimes that adversely impact the safety of community members and drain the resources of probation departments and police departments throughout the state, ... Therefore, be it resolved, we need to make enforcement better.
That's a really great question. That particular one was drafted by the city of Whittier. Whittier. That's Whitty. And that was their discretion of the verbiage that they used. It is difficult to use that kind of language in a non-editorial type news forum and actually be 100% accurate.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. I guess mine was more of a statement than a question, and I appreciate that background there. But especially given the conversation that I had on Wednesday with neighbors about the closing of the Sonoma Developmental Center, the impact that what the state is doing on our mental health system, it's hard for me to think that the fixes for all of what's in this resolution come from tightening the language from what voters have done. So just we'll leave it at that.
Chief Frieder, I understand that what the League is looking for is support for a negotiation. Are you a member of the group that will be participating in that negotiation?
Cal Chiefs has legislative liaisons, and they are involved in many of these aspects and the impacts it's having on local communities, especially from the dollars that are coming. When you talk about prison realignment, the vast majority of those dollars went into the county for county programming. Very little came to local communities when local communities are dealing with the vast majority of the problem. How the counties have chosen to spend the dollars varies county to county. So I think there is a lot of room for improvement on any of the legislative pieces here. The goal ultimately is to lower the prison population for the state and then try to figure out what's the best methodology to make sure people don't end up in these programs. The county is currently, because of 109, is really, our jail is becoming, there's changes in the way the jail is going, and that's really at the county level. But locally, we're seeing more people being supervised locally in our community that historically were not in previous. And some of those dollars are not coming into the local cities to be able to manage some of that. That's some of the conversation.
Okay. And it's not mentioned in the staff report, I don't think, but are you recommending this to us?
I think it's always good to support when we can have a negotiation to talk about some of those impacts, because once you pass 109 or 47 or something, we don't know all the impacts until we get down the road a little bit, have more data sets to be able to understand what are the impacts to the local community, and I think it's worth supporting.
Thank you. Any other questions, Council? Mr. Oliveris, you have this one.
Thank you, Mayor. And I do want to add that this will be a discussion that's probably worth having, and I would hope that during the discussions there is information brought forward related to data that supports some of these issues. We have had some of these discussions at the Public Safety Policy Committee in the past, but I have yet to see significant data that's been brought forward. So hopefully this will generate that conversation, and supporting data will be presented as well. So I will make a motion for our voting delegates to support the two proposed resolutions at the League of California Cities 2017 Annual Conference.
Second. Your votes, Council. Oh, sorry, Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, my question is if the council member will split the vote between the two resolutions. I'm supportive overall of the intent of the first resolution. I certainly think that the chief and the Chiefs Association being at the table and having the conversation is really important and something that needs to happen. I don't see this resolution as being the way forward, particularly coming from a council member who doesn't have the law enforcement background or doesn't have the mental health background that I think is necessary. So I just ask that you split the two resolutions.
Thank you. So I will make a motion for our voting delegates to support resolution number 1 at the League of California Cities 2017 Annual Conference.
Second. Your votes on number 1. That passes with 6 ayes and 1 no, Mr. Rogers.
And I'll make a motion for our voting delegates to support resolution number 2 at the League of California Cities 2017 Annual Conference.
Second. Your votes. And that passes with 7 ayes. Thank you. Mr. McGlynn, 14.2.
Item 14.2. Report, resolution approving professional service agreement with Axon Enterprise Incorporated for the purchase of Axon body-worn cameras and access to evidence.com operating system and data storage. Hank Schroeder, Police Chief, presenting.
Mayor Corsi, council members, although I'll be here to answer any of the policy questions, ultimately the work was completed by Technical Service Division Manager Keith Hinton, who will be presenting some of the bullet points today. I'll be here for questions.
Good evening, Mayor Corsi and members of the council. Again, I'm Keith Hinton. I'm the Division Manager for Technical Services in the Police Department. Happy to meet you. So we're here tonight to discuss the contract award to Axon Enterprises for body-worn cameras and data storage. Currently, the police department is engaged in a body-worn camera program, and we're using the VView LE3 cameras for that program. We purchased those cameras about 2 years ago, and those cameras currently are no longer available as they're not manufactured anymore. And the next generation of VView, the LE4, is not compatible with our software interface. Additionally, that software interface is, you have heard some from our independent police auditor in the past about that creating some difficulties in finding software and some additional problems. The police IT spends currently 10 hours a week resolving issues with not only the interface, but the LE4 cameras, or LE3 cameras, excuse me, and associated hardware. Our officers are spending an hour a day managing the workflow associated with those cameras and the interface. And to walk you through some of that workflow, As you can see, it's an extended workflow. The officer records the video in the field. The officer is then required, before they can see the video or add any data to it, to return to the station and download that video. That video to download, because it's all the video on the camera, as well as all the other cameras, can take up to 15 to 20 minutes to download. While the officer waits, he's essentially just waiting for that to download. Then he's able to access the video, to watch it, and then write his report associated with that, and add metadata, and if that officer needs to then transfer it to the digital evidence management system, he does all that. So the important point on that is that all that has to take place before the officer leaves for the workday. So it's an extended process that takes place at the end of their workday. So in July, the police department issued an RFP for body-worn cameras, hardware, and associated software. The criteria that we used, we found particularly important to us, was we wanted a secure cloud video storage system. We wanted an extended battery life, being 12 hours or more. And the reason for that is our weekend shifts are 12 and a half hours. A proven ability to deliver on a large-scale deployment. A field of view that was 120 degrees or greater. And we wanted the ability for officers to be able to view that video on their mobile device. Reasons for that I can walk through in a few minutes, but we wanted that. That was very important to us. And we also asked that a software vendor provide CAD integration. CAD is our computer-aided dispatch, and if the integration will download data directly to the software so that it saves officers time. After review of the proposals, the Axon was determined to be the most responsive. And reasons for that, or benefits that we saw with going with Axon, was their battery life was superior. It was definitely in excess of 12 hours. Axon had a proven track record of large-scale deployments. Many of those cities that they've deployed in are similar size to us. Locally, they've deployed to Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, which has been with them for 2 years and hasn't experienced any of the similar problems that we've had. Some of the other similar cities are Fremont and Vallejo. Big benefit from them was the camera replacement after 2.5 years. And what that gives us is the ability to, at 2.5 years, not have to look across the variety of camera providers to find out who's making the camera that's most up to date. That gives us the opportunity to get that most up-to-date camera at 2.5 years as part of the contract. They also offered a simplified workflow. Officers can view their video using a mobile device. Officers that have tested the camera report spending 15 minutes or less. So as you recall, previous experience was an hour. That gave us a net officer savings of 75 hours per year. And to walk you through the workflow that contributes to that is an officer, again, activates and records their video, but instead of returning to the station to download it and wait for that to occur, they're able to look at it on their mobile device. They're able to view the camera or the video without downloading it, and they're able to add their metadata, which identifies it. Additionally, the CAD is dumping in data to that, so it saves on what they actually have to add to it. They return to the station, plug their camera in and download it at the end of their shift, and they go home. The actual downloading takes place after they've left the building. So we're recommending tonight that the council award a contract to Axon Enterprises Incorporated for the acquisition of body-worn camera and access to their evidence.com operating system and data storage. Any questions?
Thank you. Council, questions? Mr. Rogers.
Just one quick one. The mobile device that the officer can view it on, is it their personal mobile device?
No, we're also going through a acquisition of some mobile devices, some phones, and we're purchasing those through a current grant.
Okay, so the device they'll be able to view it on can't download it to their personal devices. It'll be at the office, stored in the cloud.
Two things on that. Yeah, it'll be separate from their personal device, but it also doesn't download to that device. It's the application that they view it through actually looks at the camera and sees the video without downloading it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Other questions? You referred to, this is about $200,000 a year, $1 million over 5 years. Where do these funds come from?
Mayor Corsi, currently I'm working with the city manager and the finance director, Debbie Lochner. We'll be absorbing it in our next couple of fiscal years to keep the program up and running through either a variety of crime mitigation funds or one-time state funding.
Thank you. Do we have any cards on this, Ms. Gomez? Thank you. Mr. Rogers, you have this one.
I will move the resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa approving a professional services agreement for body-worn cameras and 5 years of associated software and digital evidence management to Axon Enterprise, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $1,017,537.54 and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Council, your votes. That passes with 7 ayes. Thank you. Mr. McGlynn, 14.3.
Item 14.3, report adoption of revised water, recycled water, and sewer standards and specifications and delegation of approval authority for future updates to the Board of Public Utilities. Gabe Osborne, Acting Deputy Director. It's the Deputy Director, right? And I want to congratulate Mr. Osborne. He is no longer, that's what I thought, the Acting Deputy Director. He is the Deputy Director. Congratulations, Gabe.
Good evening, Mayor Corsi and members of the council. As mentioned in the introduction, the item in front of the council at this point in time is a proposed revision to the sewer and water design and construction standards. And I'd like to begin the presentation by providing a brief outline that will act as a roadmap on navigating through this topic. We'll begin by first providing a background on the sewer and water standards. This will cover the specific document types that are in that general category. We'll move a little bit to the revision process and talk about the steps that we took to get to where we are today. We're actually recommending an adoption of a revision. We'll also discuss the changes. As you can see, there is a significant number of changes. It is a very technical document. So what we'll do is just give a few examples of how those changes fit in probably about 3 buckets of standard change types. So what we're hoping to get out of that is to show that really most of what we do is really for clarity's sake. It's just to clean up the document to make it easier to understand. We'll also talk about the importance of keeping that up to date. So this will get a little bit into how we're going to handle this in the future with an annual review cycle to oppose having a big beefy amount of changes in the document. It'll streamline it a bit. We'll also talk about the 2 other items that are in the resolution, because in the addition to the adoption of changes, we have 2 separate recommendations. One is to delegate future approval authority to the Board of Public Utility for future updates, and the other is to create an effective date that will be 30 days from the date of adoption, and we'll talk about the importance of those later on in the presentation. So first with the background, these standards actually compile 3 different document types. We have design standards, which is laid out in an outline format. It's really the framework for designing infrastructure used very heavily by the design community. We have the construction standard, which is heavily used by the construction industry. This is usually a singular document. It has a visual representation of the infrastructure with additional narrative requirements. Thought process is it's a singular document that could be handed to a contractor, and in theory that infrastructure could be built based off of that. In addition, there are also the construction specifications. These are the testing procedures and installation methods that apply to the infrastructure. These standards actually apply to all modifications to the water and sewer system, and this could be anything from a new installation of a water service to a main extension to a main repair. They're done under capital improvement projects as well as the conditions that are required as part of private development projects, and they're also used heavily by our local operations anytime a repair is done to the system. So they essentially maintain consistency out of the 3 channels for installation. The sewer and water standards are also part of a much larger document set that is basically the citywide standards for public infrastructure. So in addition to sewer and water, that standard set includes streets, traffic, storm drain, parks and landscaping, as well as streetlights. The most recent update to the standards for the water side occurred in 2009, and that was a fairly simple update. It accounted for requirements on the fire side where residential fire sprinklers became a little more prevalent, so we had to respond with an upgrade to the water service sizes. We also moved away from copper services. In 2014, there was a much more detailed update that was proposed that included all the standard types. So that was a significantly large document. And that was brought before the council on June 3rd of 2014. At that time, it was actually continued. Council requested a clear description of the changes. So at that point, what we have provided today, which is the red line changes of all the standards, that was not included with the document at that point in time, so it was a bit difficult to understand what was changing. On June 10 of 2014, it was continued once again, and this was actually based on staff's request, so they requested additional time to prepare the documents. And then the item was actually heard on June 8th of 2014, and it was essentially redirected. So there were some concerns at that time, and they were mainly expressed on the street standards, which have a very visual element, that there was consistency with other design criteria. So prior to bringing before the council, there was a request that it get vetted out at lower boards and commissions, specifically the Design Review Board and Planning Commission. So based on the challenges that the document experienced in the past, we wanted to take a different approach. So since 2014, we've been continually making changes to the document. So instead of bringing everything forward as one whole, we broke it up into 3 different phases. So phase 1 today is the potable water, recycled water, and sewer. What we're proposing in phase 2 is the storm drain, which will cover all the underground infrastructure. And then we get into the very visual elements. And those will be streets, streetlights, traffic, and parks and landscaping. And what we hope out of that is it allows a very focused discussion on some of the specific changes, because in the water it is very much associated with clarity, but there will be more specific items in the streets that really have a visual element associated with them. It also allows to uncover any potential to delegate to a future lower border commission. So if it will look into that and possibly bring forward recommendations on that front as well. So the revision process really starts with the departments, so I cannot really accept any of the credit for preparing that document. It was done very heavily by the Water Department, various divisions. So we bring forward the proposed changes. There is also discussion with Fire, Transportation, and Public Works, so it's really to maintain consistencies with all other codes and policies. And when we get into a draft form of the document, obviously the public outreach and community engagement aspect comes fairly critical. This does affect the outside because it applies to private development projects. So this is a very targeted audience because of what the document is. It goes into public infrastructure. So we actually rely heavily on 2 organizations, American Council of Engineering Companies and Engineering Contractors Association. Both organizations have been able to review the document, and we have incorporated all changes. And it really is important to point out that it's not just to review this document. We work with them on a regular basis to iron out issues with the standards, so it's constantly updating as the years go on. But what we rely on the 2 organizations to do is really to identify how it affects the end user. So at the end of the day, when the infrastructure is built by private development, ultimately someone pays for that. So we really rely on these 2 organizations to identify additional costs that would then be applied to private development projects. And in this situation, there were no comments on that front regarding an increase in costs. Once we moved through the public engagement aspect, we brought it forward to the Board of Public Utilities to get any comments from one of the lower boards. It was brought before the board in actually 2 different settings. On May 4th, 2017, it was a study session to review the proposal. There were very few comments that came out of that. We really discussed how ECA is involved in the process, and there was some questions about how we actually show that support. And what spawned out of that is the letter that was attached to the staff report that ECA provided showing their support. It was then brought before the board on a formal action on June 1, 2017, and the board formally recommended the 3 items that we are proposing today. So that's the adoption of the proposed revisions, delegation of future approval authority, and the 30-day effective date. Now, the revision process itself, getting into the description of changes, as I mentioned, there are really 3 buckets that we can place most of these changes in. When reviewing the document, as we went through it, it really is looking as if that 70% is pretty much clarification. So this is really just verbiage or detail to better explain the intent. So it doesn't really change it, it just makes it easier for the outside to interpret the requirement. The second category is correction, and we anticipate that this is going to be about 20%, and this really identifies correct information or material. A good example of that is simply changing Utilities Department to Santa Rosa Water. There are a lot of those normal corrections in that document. And then the 10% category is improvement. So this is actually making the infrastructure better, and it's usually done in the vein of ensuring that it's cheaper to maintain long term. So this is where we get really sensitive about the cost. And as I mentioned, we didn't receive any feedback from the private side on that front. So this is just the one example that we'll provide of the standard, just to show you how some of those categories apply. This is a backflow device that's associated with a fire line connection, by far one of the more visual aspects of the water system. And so what we can see in this document is we actually have the two categories that are here. The blue is boarded as clarification, and as we see it on the right, we're actually just removing sizes on the various components of the device, and that's mainly because it's not a specific size. It's based on fire flow calculations, so it can be 6, 7, or 8. On the left, we have the height of the device. So before we actually specified a 12-inch minimum, but to avoid the devices being installed 6 feet in the air, we actually had a threshold on the height. And then on the top, that is the one improvement. So that is replacing a 90-degree fitting with a T. That it makes it easier to flush the line for disinfecting purposes. So that is actually an improvement to that installation. We always like to point out the new standards, and there is one in this situation, and this is associated with restrained fittings. Anytime we make a bend in the water system to avoid issues with pressure on that joint, a concrete block has historically been poured around that. Makes it very difficult when you have to dig it up and repair it. So we actually allow restrained fittings that serve the same purpose, and we now have a standard that covers it. So this is really just covering clarity, since it is something that we provided before.
Excuse me, I find this one really interesting, and I want to appreciate the work that's gone into doing this. I think it's very important for our system and for our contractors, and I want to thank you for it. I am interested in the concept of restrained joints, and am wondering if there is a concern at all about using the restrained joint as a fitting for the likelihood of increased earthquake effects, damage, because the joint is restrained, and restrained by a fitting as opposed to in a block. So I don't know if I'm way off base or if I'm in the right ballpark on asking the question, but if you can let me know if there's any issue associated with the restrained joint changes in earthquakes.
Absolutely, that's an excellent question. So anytime you're in a fault zone, the whole requirements change for that very reason. So what happens is in the standards themselves, the city engineer is granted authority to ask for more stringent requirements when certain conditions exist. So there's a lot of protective measures that are done for that very reason.
Okay, so we have a mechanism, these are general guidelines, and we have a mechanism around where the fault lines are to revisit the restraint joints.
That is absolutely correct.
Thank you very much, that's what I wanted to
You're very welcome. So what we wanted to point out too is in the standard specifications, there are a significant number of changes in this document, to the tune of approximately 60-70% of the document experienced some level of change. So we wanted to highlight really what the result of that was. So once again, the specifications do really deal with construction practices. And on capital improvement projects, we have a tendency to develop specification sheets for each individual project. And on the private development side, we have a bit of a watered-down version of that. So what we wanted to do, just to maintain consistency through the two avenues of construction, is to create a singular set. So this benefits a few different fronts. It avoids on capital improvement projects writing lengthy specification sheets for every project. It just refers back to the standard. And it also gives a level of predictability to the construction industry. The same contractors install the same infrastructure through capital improvement projects and private development. So it makes it a fairly seamless, and the predictability aspect is there. So now we'll talk briefly about the review process in the future and the importance of why we keep the standards up to date. So really, once again, it ensures consistency throughout all additions and modifications to the system. And it's a predictability element for the outside. So what happens when the standards become stale is there a tendency on a project-by-project specific basis to deviate away from that. So all of a sudden that loses the consistency aspect. So to avoid the need of addressing things on that project-by-project specific basis, our goal is to really keep the update process on an annual basis, so we're not dealing with significant number of changes. So what we're proposing in the future is to go with an annual review cycle. So internally, we will coordinate with a citywide standards committee to ensure that there are consistency throughout other codes and requirements. We will also involve the public in that, so we'll go through the same channel of involving ECA and ACEC. And what we'll do is we'll align the update with industry-specific code cycle changes. What we did not want to do is have a sequence where we created changes in various document types and various times throughout the year. So what we'll likely do is place it on the first of the calendar year. And that aligns with the very important building code cycle change. So that will create that level of predictability to the outside. So along with that, we are recommending that the approval authority for the recycled water, sewer standards, and potable water standards be delegated to the Board of Public Utilities. What we're hoping this results in is a timelier process of future revisions, because we're essentially truncating the process and shaving approximately 30 days off that review, and that becomes more critical when we're putting it on an annual review cycle. We do believe that this decision is consistent with Section 25 of the Charter of the City of Santa Rosa, which gives the general policy authority over the sewer and water system to the Board of Public Utilities. In addition, our third recommendation is the 30-day effective date, and what we are proposing is the standards go into effect 30 days from the date of adoption, and they only apply to projects submitted after the date. So what this is attempting to do is avoid a dramatic change to projects already in the review. We do have public improvement projects that have gone through a first or second plan check. We would like not to impose this level of change to where they're simply making red line changes for clarity purposes. So we're hoping to give that 30-day period as really a grace period for the outside to get projects in that have already gotten to a 90% design under the old standards, and allow them not to dramatically affect their design. So it's really just intended to give that grace period, that level of predictability, and that period in which the outside can adapt to the change. So that basically concludes the presentation. So I'd like to end this by simply restating the recommendations, which we have three. We are recommending that the City Council adopt the proposed revisions to the design and construction standards. In addition, we are recommending that the City Council delegate future approval authority to the Board of Public Utilities. And we are recommending that the City Council allow the standards to go into effect 30 days from the date of adoption. So at this point, we can open up to any questions you may have.
Councilor, any questions on this? Appreciate a clear report on a technical issue. Ms. Gomez, are there any cards on this one? All right. Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, Gabe, congratulations, and I would like to echo the mayor's comments. It was very clear. This is reading the materials like, okay, this should be interesting, but you made it very competent for us to be able to follow along. So thank you very much for the presentation. So I move a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa adopting the revised and updated water, recycled water, and sewer standards and specifications, and delegating approval authority for future updates to the Board of Public Utilities, and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Your votes? That has 7 ayes. Thank you. Ms. Gomez, are there cards for comments on non-agenda items? This is for public comment on non-agenda items tonight. I'll start with Gregory Furon, followed by Elizabeth Nayland.
Thank you. Is this one on? Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. District elections. I know it's not your obligation to start this conversation right now, but I think it's mine to help the community about how to do it. I figure if I'm going to convince my neighbors to get involved with this right away, I better find out what it's all about and how to do it. So the first thing I did was to go to the county registrar and find out where are the precincts, what map can I get. I downloaded, as everyone can, a 5 gigabyte file containing, as you can see, every precinct in the city of Santa Rosa. It's interesting, it's huge, and somewhat useful. More useful to me was the districts that make up the county supervisors, because I figured, why not start from something that already exists? Since people were talking about 4 districts and an elected mayor, I figured since I knew there were 4 supervisors that shared Santa Rosa, I figured I'd look at those districts and see how easy it was to make equal populations and try to solve the problem that way. This one at the top is the districts right now. You can see it's 4 of them, 1 and 3 on the right and 4 and 5 on the left. Roughly, I asked them how many registered voters are in each of them. There's 88,000 registered voters in Santa Rosa, about 15,000 in the 4 and 5 on the left, and 30,000 on the middle, which is the third, and the right, which is the first. So if you roughly cut the third and the first in half, which is what this bottom one is, by drawing a line down here and a line across here, you end up with 6 districts that have 15,000 voters in each of them, roughly equivalent, but kind of based on the supervisors, something they did a long time ago, not necessarily something that works for Santa Rosa. And certainly, I would hate to be bound to their decisions, sometime in the future about where their supervisorial lines are. So I started thinking, what if we do lines that didn't have anything to do with supervisors? That just had to do with how we would like to carve up Santa Rosa. So the first thing I thought of was, why don't we take the major roadways? So this one's the major roadways. Roughly 15,000 in each one. You have to move things up and down. It's very consistent with the precincts, and it might work. But it really doesn't take into account neighborhoods or, any kind of communities of interest. So I played with another one, which is, what if we all sort of had to deal with the core of Santa Rosa? What if you tried to make it so that more of the districts had to do with downtown? They shared an interest. What I'm saying is, with a little bit of what I used Google Maps and a little bit of collaboration, we can all come up with lots of ways of carving up Santa Rosa. We can make it 4 in a mayor, we can make it 6, we can make it 7, we can do anything we want with the 88,000 voters that are in Santa Rosa, and I think we should. The only other thing I just wanted to say was that I think you should engage the voters intensely. You just try to make this a blind process based on your needs and where you live. You should probably elect all the districts in 1 year and then have a lottery to figure out who gets 4-year terms.
Thank you, Mr. Farrar. Elizabeth Nealon. She'll be followed by Dwayne DeWitt.
Well, I hope I didn't embarrass myself too much last time by calling Santa Rosa a hick town. I will now call America hick country. I mean, it's been quite an experience living here for almost 70 years and being fairly conscious during most of that period. I would hope if we are a hick town that we can raise the vibration, the group vibration of Santa Rosa to be something more than a hick town. And that somehow, yes, the racist cops can be weeded out and decent people can be, people that aren't racially sick can be their replacements. So I heard, where did I hear this? I think on Berkeley radio, that if we can't be divided, we win. And the 1% is an overbearing, overly moneyed, and usually corporate bunch who don't want us to remember things, don't want us to feel what we're living through, don't want us to tell others what we're feeling, and don't want us to dream. That's pretty scary. But God loves diversity. I mean, if there is a God, if there is a God, I'm believing that it's a female. But nonetheless, obviously there wouldn't be octopuses in the ocean if God didn't like diversity. Did I already say that we may have arrived on different ships, but today we're all in the same boat? I think that was Berkeley radio too. I heard them talking about torture theorists that were employed by the American government, people that were involved in torture in other parts of the world and then were scooped up and brought here to teach at our school where we taught assassins how to be mean and cruel. School of the Americas. Anyway, I saw the Al Gore movie, and it was terribly, terribly hopeful. He said our democracy has been hacked, and of course it was never a straight-up democracy. It was always a representative democracy. He said that when fossil fuels are being used, we're using the atmosphere as a sewer. And I also wanted to, it's not ready, oh well. I wanted to bring forth the new movie about Dolores Herrera. And she apparently was equal with Cesar Chavez on some level, but because she was a woman, she was discounted. But there's a new movie about her. I hope to see it. I'll come back and talk to you about it. Yeah, the Al Gore movie is fabulous. I felt so much hope after I saw it. It was very beautiful. He's a great man. Thank you.
Dwayne DeWitt.
Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. And in 1996, I was working with people from the Concerned Citizens from Santa Rosa. Attorney Dick Day, we put together a petition for district elections. And I'd like to read it to you, some of the parts you can see there. But just a few of the important things. That the names that were on this, the intention was to circulate a petition for the city of Santa Rosa to amend the city charter to provide for the election of council members from 6 equal districts and for the district direct election of the mayor at large. At that time, Santa Rosa had 130,000 residents and 75,000 voters. Widely dispersed population is represented by 5 East Side council members back then. There was only 5, and the switch to 7 was to try to perhaps give more diversity, which didn't occur. Only one person living west of the freeway at that time, where 40% of Santa Rosa's population resided, had been elected to the council in the last 25 years. So that's 20 years ago. It's 45 years, and not many people from the west have been elected. Anyway, the thing that was most important is I know that people will be jockeying now. The race is on, the jockeying has begun. And it's important that you keep one thing in mind about this petition. It did not go forward because people were against it. People who were working on it stopped to let the urban growth boundary initiative go forward. It was felt that if there were 2 things on the same election, that perhaps urban growth boundary might suffer, and that was something that was paramount. Unfortunately, that essentially crippled the west side of town to being a disadvantaged, overburdened area for the next 20 years. So I realized last week I didn't give this to you. And so I've brought copies so each of you will have it. And you'll see that we did the old-fashioned cut and paste method. Some of our lines aren't straight there, but we did our best. And it was going well at the time that we decided urban growth boundaries were so important. So I'll give this to each of you, plus I'd like it to go to the clerk to let the record show that I brought it. I'll give one to the city manager and the city attorney. It's good late night reading. It'll help you get your kind of fix on how you want to divide it up. Last but not least, please include Roseland in this as if they've already been annexed. That gives you over 90,000 people. So 15,000, that'll get some of you guys elected again, I'm sure. Thank you so much.
That's all the cards I have for public comment. We'll move on to public hearings. 15.1, Mr. McGlynn.
15.1, public hearing, Farmer Lane Senior Housing rezoning to include the site in the Senior Housing Combining District and density bonus for 18% density increase for the property located at 201 Farmers Lane, Assessors Parcel Number 014-017-093, file number PRJ16-018. Bill Rose, Supervising Planner, presenting.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The item for you tonight is the Farmers Lane Senior Housing Project. I'd like to begin with this slide. I think you're becoming somewhat familiar with this. This is our progress report slide. It shows how this specific project is addressing the city's goal for 5,000 residential units by 2012. And as you can see at the bottom of the slide, this project represents 26 total units. Of those, 21 will be market rate, 5 will be moderate income affordable units, and these are for sale condominium units. This is a senior housing project. So the project consists of 2 multifamily structures, 26 condominium units, for sale senior housing, 5 of which are for moderate income units. Project requires 4 applications: a rezoning, density bonus, tentative map, design review. The rezoning and density bonus are before you tonight. Both have been acted upon. Recommendations have been given by the Planning Commission, and the tentative map was approved by the Planning Commission. The design review application will go to the design review board this Thursday afternoon. This is a close-in aerial of the site. It is on the west side of Farmers Lane, just south of the Farmers Lane and Highway 12 intersection. The Santa Rosa Creek runs across the top of the site from west to east. This is a little wider view. You can see that it's just across the street from the St. Eugene's School and Church. Here's a site plan of the project. The main 4-story building is located just south of the creek. The project does include the introduction of a creek trail. The 4-unit building will have a pathway that connects to that trail. And the 2-story building is located at the south end of the site. So in 2008, the City Council approved a general plan amendment and rezoning. This was to change the site to a medium-density residential designation. In 2015, the project went before the Design Review Board for concept design review. In 2016, the Development Review pre-application meeting was held. That was with city staff. Later in that year, a pre-application neighborhood meeting was held, and that was with the neighbors. In July of 2016, the formal applications were submitted, and then at the end of 2016, staff prepared an issues letter. Final project materials and responses to that issues letter were submitted in March of this year, and as I mentioned, the Planning Commission took unanimous action in July of this year. So the site here, you can see that it's a medium-density residential designation, and that is consistent with the block of properties along Farmers Lane heading toward the south. This is the subject site. Project meets a number of general plan policies. I won't go through them all. An expanded list is also in your written staff report, but in summary, the project meets the housing needs of all Santa Rosa residents. It maintains a balance of various housing types. It is a density bonus project, and also it does address its proximity to the creek, and it provides, as I mentioned, the pedestrian pathways. The rezoning request is not to change the base zoning, that's R318, but it's simply to add the SH senior housing overlay, and that's a requirement for the senior housing project. And just for reference, that's the general plan, and as I mentioned, the general plan and the zoning are consistent with one another. And this explains the rezoning that I just referenced. And you can see at the bottom of the slide, it defines the senior housing project. What is it? It is a project that must be occupied 80% of the units by at least one person 55 years or older. And that senior housing project, per the zoning code, does have a reduced parking requirement. The other item before you tonight is the density bonus request. And this project qualifies for an 18% density increase, and it is also entitled to 2 zoning concessions for development standards. So first off, I'd like to walk through the calculation for the density increase. The maximum allowable density under the general plan is 22 units. That would be 22 market rate units. 5 of those units are proposed for moderate income. Those are the affordable units. As such, the project then is entitled to 4 additional density increase units, and those are market rate units. So 22 units plus the 4 density totals 26. Of those 26, 5 are affordable.
Excuse me, Bill. Sorry, I've got my printed presentation here, and it says the density increase is 5 units versus the 4 on this, which is correct.
The presentation that I'm giving is correct, and I failed to mention we made a slight change right before the presentation to correct that, to make sure the math adds up.
So there are 4 affordable units in the complex?
No, this is where it gets a little tricky. So 26 total units, 5 of which are affordable. Because 5 of the 22 that it would normally get are affordable, the project is entitled to 4 additional, what we're terming density increase units. Those are market rate units.
Thank you.
So the parking meets the parking requirements. The on-site parking requirements per the zoning code are satisfied. However, the zoning code allows the decision maker, in this case the city council, to increase those parking requirements. The applicants have requested as a concession that no increase be instituted on this project. In addition, the second concession is with regard to building height. The base zoning district allows 45 feet. The project is proposed at 47 feet. And the additional 2 feet are specifically, it's related to rooftop equipment screening. And that recommendation came from the design review board. The board felt that it was appropriate to screen that mechanical equipment, and so that's where the extra height is coming from. These are a couple of perspective drawings that you can see. This is of the main 4-story building from Farmers Lane. And this is internal on the site. From the north looking south, this is the 2-story building. Staff and ultimately the Planning Commission found that this project qualifies for 2 CEQA provisions. First is the CEQA streamlining provision 15183 for consistency with the general plan and zoning, and the other is the infill categorical exemption. Staff has received several comments related to parking and building height. As I mentioned, both of these items are the subject of the concessions requested by the applicants related to the density bonus. As such, staff and the Planning Commission have no unresolved issues at this time. In conclusion, staff and the Planning Commission recommend that the council introduce an ordinance rezoning 201 Farmers Lane into the Senior Housing Combining District, and it is further recommended by the Planning Commission and staff that the council approve a density bonus to allow an 18% density increase and 2 concessions for the development of the Farmers Lane Senior Housing Project. I'm joined here at the staff table with Claire Hartman and Susie Murray. We're available to answer any questions. The applicant team is also prepared to make a presentation as well.
Thank you. Council, other questions? Ms. Combs.
Thank you very much for bringing this project to us. I have a question. I've tried to read the arborist report, and I have a question about the protection and preservation of the oak trees. We've had a letter from a resident who's concerned about trees on their property. Can you give me are there conditions that have been put forward with regard to the presence of an arborist and the careful treatment of those oak trees?
As Bill mentioned, we're going to be going before the Design Review Board this coming Thursday, very close together there, and that will be before them. There's a condition of approval in the Design Review Board resolution, the draft resolution that requires tree protection, and specifically in at the Planning Commission meeting, the landscape architect spoke about those trees and the intent to preserve them and protect them during construction.
I want to make sure I understand you. If by some chance on Thursday tree preservation doesn't get included in the design review conversation, would it still be going forward as a tree protection because of comments made by the Planning Commission, the previous design review, or by this council? Right? Does the council need to make a statement about tree preservation?
So as Susie mentioned, there are draft conditions of approval. Staff would be more than happy to include any comments that the council has for direction and advisory comments to the Design Review Board.
Thank you. I was just concerned about the nature of what it meant to be draft going into design review. Thank you.
Other questions, council? I have a couple of questions. On the creek trail, this comes in from Farmers Lane. What happens at the west end of the property?
It's, the creek trail will be developed incrementally as development comes through. So at that west end, it'll pretty much be a dead end for now until the next segment goes in, very similar to sidewalks and whatnot.
I guess what I'm asking is if there's anything to prevent this becoming an attractive nuisance, I guess.
There's a four-story housing, there will be a four-story housing building right there with, I believe, 12 units looking right down on top of that creek path. So that's probably the safest way to keep nuisance from occurring, annoying activities over there. Right now, there's my understanding from some of the residents over there is that there is some, they have a problem with people sleeping over there and by the creek. And this, generally when we see this type of development, we also see those problems go away.
And I wouldn't be concerned about the property directly in front of the building. I'm wondering what happens once you get to the end of that creek trail, the development of that creek trail, and how that leads. It still invites people to travel along the creek there. And is there, what will the treatment be at the end of that trail?
The pavement will end at the property line.
No treatment?
No treatment, correct.
For the council and the public, can you explain in a little more detail the rule about concessions that the developer can choose from a menu of concessions, 2, I believe, and those are, does the council have discretion in granting the 2 that are selected by the developer?
So perhaps I can describe the concessions and how the density bonus rules apply, and then in terms of the discretion, I'll defer to the city attorney. So it's a sliding scale, basically. So the lower the level of affordability, the more the units, the more concessions you get, and you get a maximum up to 3. So based on the percentage of affordable units on this project, that not only dictates how many extra units, residential units, you get, it also dictates how many concessions, and in this case it's 2. Those concessions are to development standards, things like parking and height, could be setbacks, lot coverage, and in this case, it is the parking and it's the height that's being requested.
And does that mean that when it comes to parking and height, that the council does not have discretion on those issues?
I'll defer to the city attorney on that.
I'm sorry, could you state the question again?
When the developer chooses concessions such as parking and height, does that take our discretion on those issues away?
It limits your discretion. Under the state law, the developer may choose which concessions the developer wishes, and there are very limited grounds on which the local agency may deny that concession. And that's what I had just pulled up here. It was from the staff report. The first would be that if you found that the concession was not required in order to provide for affordable housing costs or affordable rents. Second would be if the concession has a specific adverse impact on public health and safety, on the physical environment, or on any real property that is listed in the California Register of Historical Resources, and you determine that there's no feasible way to mitigate those adverse impacts. Third is if you found that the incentive or concession would be contrary to state or federal law. So those are the 3 grounds upon which you could deny a requested concession. Otherwise, the hands are tied.
Thank you for that clarification. I have a couple of cards from the public. Dwayne DeWitt.
Thank you, sir.
He'll be followed by Ann Seeley.
I'm going to use the overhead here, if I may.
Sorry, can you hold on just 1 minute, Mr. DeWitt? This is a public hearing? I'll open the public hearing.
Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. I have no financial interest in this project in any way, shape, or form. I don't know these people at all, and I'm here to advocate that you approve the project and approve the senior housing. I base it on the Wayback Machine, if you will. I've brought this here today from 20-something years ago, and basically it points out something very interesting. Back at that time, for senior units in the entire city of Santa Rosa, it was stated we had 3,660 units. We had a population of 125,000 back then. Our population now is really close to this level, and if you count the Roseland annexation in there, we're basically probably already at 190,000 people and have not really put that many more senior units in. So back in the day when this was going on, we had Unit A, Unit B type approaches. This is the 97 report, and we weren't getting the stuff built even back then. And it was pointed out that we needed to come up with some approaches for getting the seniors in. So the growth management ordinance wasn't really helping us that much. Back then we had this little adventure. This was the Bellevue Ranch over off of Hearn Avenue and Stony Point Road in 1998. That's when this paper's from. And the price of new housing outstrips inflation. We've had this problem for 20 years. So essentially, I'm here to advocate for something that I believe will help our community in the greater situation. And I wanted to stress that I believe it's important to give them the benefits that have been asked for, the concessions, if you will, and just let it get rolling. Let it get done. It'll be a nice place there. I go by there a lot. Right now it's kind of messed up. And at one point in my life, I was fortunate to be a resident of Gilbert Avenue, right over by there. So I believe this is the right place for it, and it's going to be a good project. And I believe that the city staff has done a good deed on this. And you could even give them perhaps less parking by saying there should be something signed by the project proponents to have seniors that won't be driving, maybe ones that will be using bicycles or the new zip cars and things like that. We can walk our talk. And I leave early. Thank you so much.
Ann Seeley.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
If the council pleases, the applicant team was wishing to make a brief presentation as well. I don't know.
And that's fine after Ms. Seeley.
Okay.
I just have these 2 cards.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Ann Seeley speaking for Concerned Citizens for Santa Rosa. Yes, we've been around a long time. Dwayne talked about 1996, but we started in 1986. I think this is a terrific project. I'm very much in support of it, if and only if the egress from the project has a right turn only to go south on Farmers Lane. I imagine that's in place. Can't imagine it wouldn't be, but to have anything else would make chaos for traffic in that area. But I'm glad to see that the use is going to be very productive. Thank you.
Thank you. If the applicant wants to make a presentation, come on up.
Thank you, Mayor Corsi. Steve Sharp, representing the applicant today. Council members, good afternoon. A real short presentation for you today. With me today are the property owner, Barbara Hayes, the architect with Hedgepeth Associates, Paul Gilger, Rachel McQueen with Quadriga, and Daleen Whitlock with W-Trans. We're all prepared to give presentations and answer any questions you might have. This request is an opportunity to provide some high-density housing on a vacant lot in Farmers Lane. Believe it or not, it's probably the only vacant lot left on Farmers Lane. It's been in the development process for quite a while, as you know. It's vacant, it's highly accessible. It's near shopping areas, Montgomery Village, 4th Street. It's near public transportation. Development of the site will preserve and enhance the open space along Santa Rosa Creek, and as required by the city, we'll be putting in a bike path. Now, the dedication of the right-of-way for the bike path was put in place in the 90s, so this is moving that forward in development, and that'll be a part of the project as well. It has several significant benefits. It's a for-sale senior housing project, unique to the city, I believe, at this point. There's 5 affordable units for moderate-income households, high-quality architecture and finishes, and much of the site will remain open as a result of the creek setback, and we'll be enhancing the area along the creek as well. As your staff told you, this has been in the review process for some time. It's been reviewed in concept by the Design Review Committee, with few exceptions and recommendations we've incorporated. They liked the project and supported it. The Waterways Advisory Committee reviewed the project, had a single recommendation that there be a connection between the 4-story unit and the pathway. We had a neighborhood meeting. As a result of all of those meetings, we incorporated several changes, including retention of existing trees, and the requirement will be placed into the Design Review Committee condition, I'm sure. There'll be planting of new trees. There'll be enhancement of planting along the creek right-of-way. There'll be an 8-foot privacy fence along the westerly boundary. We'll be reducing window size and eliminating patios on the wall, the west wall that faces the neighbors on the 4-story building. And there'll be a CC&R on the project that will restrict ownership of, one parking stall per unit. As your staff mentioned, the Planning Commission reviewed and deliberated this project on July 13th. They recommended you approve the density bonus of the zone change. They approved the tentative map for the condominium. Our project team has reviewed the staff report. We find it, in its presentation, we find it inclusive and accurate. We concur with the analysis, findings, and recommendations, and we ask that you approve the zone change and density bonus along with the concessions. Paul Gilger, the architect, is here, and if you would like, can give a very brief presentation on the design of the project.
Let's see if we have any questions, Mr. Sharp.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. That was a great presentation. One of the public commenters, I think, did bring up a good point about traffic, pointing off of and having a right turn only. Would you find that to be an issue for your project to have a right turn only on the private access road?
I'm sure we can erect a sign that there would be egress from the property southbound only. It's an unusual site in the fact that there's a turn lane for the extension of, all the way along Farmers Lane there. So there's lots of businesses and other residential properties that are able to enter or exit, in crossing, but we'll include a sign.
Okay, that might be good. I don't know the process of talking to our traffic engineer either about that, but that might be something. I appreciate it.
I assume this was reviewed by our traffic engineer, and you have a traffic study as well.
Yes, we did a traffic evaluation as well as a parking evaluation. Daleen Whitlock from W-Trans is here to explain if needed.
Thank you. A brief architectural presentation.
Thank you. Paul Gilger, Senior Project Designer with Warren Hedgepeth's office. I think I'll just start with the semi-chair. It's just a pleasure to be able to bring forward to the council what I call higher quality architecture. So many times we have projects that are value engineered down, and here we have a client who really desires to put up a landmark building, and I think that's really great. If I go to the next slide. On the PDF? Yeah. We had a lot of constraints on the site, not the least of which is the creek and the creek setback, plus all of the oak trees and the setbacks around the trees and the setbacks. As you know, the city of Santa Rosa bases density on gross land, not on net. So we have to figure our density based on all the land, even though we can only use about 50% of it, and even less than that when you take out the private access lane, which is required for the fire department. That's what drove the 4-story building. Next slide, please. And then just more images of the front, and what we try to do with the architecture is capture the architecture between World War I and World War II. And the architecture you see is based on Bernard Maybeck and Julia Morgan. Next. The backside along the creek and within the project itself. So the project does not, the architecture wraps the project. Everybody gets a good view. No part of the project is just left to be inconsequential. Next, please. The small building in the back is actually a duplex, but we wanted to make it look like a high-end 2-story home. So by actually stacking the units, it makes it not look like a duplex. Next. Important is we did a lot of studies with the shadows, and the building itself does not cast any shadows on the neighbors. What you see here, there's 62 pages. This is the summer solstice. The top 3 images are without the trees. The bottom 3 images are with the trees. And the next slide is the winter solstice. We'll go to that one. Again, the top 3 images, sans trees, the bottom images with the trees. So it's important to know that even in the early morning, which would be the worst case scenario, would be 9 a.m., this picture here, the upper left corner, you can see that at 9 o'clock in the morning, the building is shadowing the creek and not shadowing the neighbors. And on the other side of the creek are businesses, not houses. And I think that wraps up the architectural part. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions? This is a public hearing. You didn't need to fill out a card if you'd like to speak, but someone did. Thomas Ells.
Hi, I want to say this is really interesting. It's a very, very beautiful building. Might have liked to see it a little further setback, but I can see that the shape of the property doesn't really allow that. But the reason I wanted to come up here is to talk about senior housing, which this is really great. And so if you recall, I may have mentioned here, as I have at the county, that I presented to the Economic Development Board the 2020 Economic Development Plan, 1998. One of the main elements of it was senior housing, which Dwayne happened to mention that we didn't have any between then and now. It didn't end up being an element of the plan, even though it was approved. I don't know how it slipped by on some of those folks, that we were going to have a lot of seniors. At any rate, the reason I'm mentioning this is that Sinead is going to come up in the not too distant future to be senior housing. And I just wanted to point out that there are people that have been talking about senior housing for a long time, and it's really important. Not really sure that it should be 100% of that project, though. But it's an interesting project. I look forward to talking about it. And this is amazing. I love that architecture, so thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the council on this issue? Seeing no one rise, I'll close the public hearing. Ms. Combs, I think you have it.
Mr. Mayor, if I may?
Yes.
Before we deliberate, there's a couple of clarifications I'd like to put forth to the City Council. The first, back to Councilmember Combs' question about conditioning related to protection of trees and also in relation to having someone, an arborist, on site during grading. And both of those items are specific conditions of approval, and they can be found in the Planning Commission resolution that's in attachment 4. It's a 42-page attachment, so bear in mind, I did find it to verify that that was conditioned. Secondly, Councilmember Tibbetts had raised the issue of a right turn only. The applicant did say he was amenable to exploring putting a sign, but I do want to be very clear, the project is not conditioned to be right turn only. We do have the city's traffic engineer here tonight. Rob Sprinkle if you'd like more discussion on that. But it was evaluated, and because there are opportunities, maybe not at peak hour, but there are opportunities for residents or visitors to exit to the left. It's not constrained in that way.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Hartman. Is there, I'm trying to remember, I drive that street every day, I should know, but is there a suicide lane on that road? I mean, is there a way for somebody to turn left? Probably the wrong word, but that's what I grew up calling it. But you know, get in there and turn left, and then you're able to kind of merge into traffic safely. Does that exist on that particular road?
I cannot verify that. Bob Sprinkle will come down and confirm or deny that there's a lane.
Central turn lane?
Central turn lane. Sorry.
Thank you. We call them two-way left turn lanes, so just for clarification. At that point, I believe it is a dedicated left turn lane, but you're still permitted to get into that lane and turn left. There are also other apartment complexes along that section that do use the turn left in and out of their driveway there, so those were evaluated as well. I mean, that was evaluated while making the decision not to require just a right turn out.
Okay, thanks. I do appreciate it. I appreciate the council's time.
Thank you.
Okay, there is both an ordinance and a resolution here. I'll read the ordinance first. Ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa reclassifying 201 Farmer Lane, Assessor's Parcel Number 014-071-093 to the R-3-18-SH zoning district, Farmers Lane Senior Housing, file number PRJ 16-018, and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Council, your votes. Passes with 7 ayes. Thank you very much.
And we have a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa making findings and determination to approve a density bonus for Farmers Lane Senior Housing located at 201 Farmers Lane, Assessor's Parcel Number 014-071-093, file number PRJ 16-018, waive further reading of text.
Second.
And your votes. And that has 7 ayes. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. McGlynn, 15.2.
Item 15.2, public hearing, appeal of Planning Commission approval of a conditional use permit for off-site parking with a parking reduction for the Santa Rosa AC Hotel by Marriott located at 210 5th Street and 201 6th Street, file number CUP17-031, Patrick Streeter, Senior Planner, presenting.
Thank you, Mayor Corsi, members of the council. The item before you is an appeal of a planning commission action which approved the off-site parking conditional use permit for the proposed Santa Rosa AC Hotel by Marriott. The hotel would be located at 210 5th Street, and a parking lot to accommodate the off-site parking would be located at 201 6th Street. The appeal is asking council to reconsider Planning Commission Resolution number 11832, which approved that conditional use permit. It also included a parking reduction, so a reduction on the amount of required parking for the hotel use. The project site is located in the Railroad Square area of Santa Rosa. The hotel is proposed for a parcel that's currently developed as a surface parking lot leased to the city at 210 5th Street. The valet off-site parking component of the project would make use of a parcel at 201 6th Street, which is presently developed with a single-family house on it. The parcel with the house where the lot is proposed does have a certain area of undeveloped land on it. It's actually 2 parcels. There are native trees as well as volunteer trees. And both parcels are immediately west of the Highway 101 or raised section that goes through downtown Santa Rosa. The off-site parking is proposed for those 2 parcels, which are tucked in between the downtown Santa Rosa off-ramp from Highway 101 and that overpass that was previously mentioned. Both are within walking distance of the now operational Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit Stop as well. So history on the project. In August of 2016, the hotel project went before a joint meeting of the Cultural Heritage Board and the Design Review Board as a concept item. A pre-application neighborhood meeting was held in October to introduce the project to neighbors and to gather feedback. And in February of 2017, the project returned to that joint board of Cultural Heritage Board and Design Review Board and received preliminary design review approval at that time. The hotel itself is permitted by right in the zoning district, so design review was the only entitlement necessary for the hotel development. However, to address parking, a conditional use permit is required. So the project went before the Planning Commission on June 22nd of this year, at which the Planning Commission approved that conditional use permit. An appeal was filed a few days later, to which the project is now before the council. As was previously mentioned, the project is located within the boundaries of the downtown station area specific plan. This is a plan that was developed to address the upcoming opening of the smart rail station and to create a more pedestrian-oriented environment for development downtown. The specific plan requires all new development to be between 2 and 5 stories in the area where the hotel is proposed. Also requires ground floor retail, so it's encouraging a mixed-use form of development. And along the 4th Street frontage, ground level uses must be activity generating. So to generate eyes on the street and pedestrian activity. Hotels are a desired use within the downtown station area specific plan. The zoning implements the specific plan. So for the off-site parking lot, the specific plan, or the general plan, has medium density residential as the zoning, and it's a transit village. Medium density as the general plan designation, which is consistent with the specific plan. And that's implemented through the transit village residential zoning district with a station area combining district overlay. The hotel building itself is on a parcel that's within the transit village mixed use development district within the general plan, and that's implemented through the transit village mixed zoning district with a historic overlay as well as the station area overlay. As was previously mentioned, the hotel is permitted by right. The parking that's prescribed with all new development in the station area plan, all new commercial development, is 1 space per 500 square feet of new floor area. So the prescribed number of spaces within this district would have been 154 spaces. A focused parking study was prepared for the project that incorporated the off-site parking lot and the valet program and found a peak demand of 124 spaces. The project is proposing 26 on-site spaces and 102 spaces to be provided off-site. Zoning Code Section 2036 regulates off-site parking. It requires a conditional use permit, and the standards are that the parking be within the proximity of the primary use, and that a parking covenant runs with the land so that if the off-site parking parcel is ever sold to another party in the future, those parking spaces remain. The design guidelines that were looked at by the Joint Cultural Heritage and Design Review Board included neighborhood design, highway corridors, building design, and infill development. The joint boards provided guidance when they approved preliminary design, and so the project will return to the Design Review Board for consideration of final design review to address those items that were provided at that joint meeting. Public comments received up to this meeting and at the public hearing at the City Council or at the Planning Commission included concerns about parking demand generated from the hotel itself, as well as the loss of parking in inventory as the surface lot is changed to this hotel use. There were also concerns about security for the off-site lot. as well as resource opportunities with the new valet lot, if there are underutilized spaces, that those could be available publicly. Also, prior to the Planning Commission meeting, a letter was received by staff from the Unite Here local organization or trade organization, which is also the appellant in this item. And the letter questioned consistency with the zoning code, the general plan, the downtown station area specific plan, as well as the California Environmental Quality Act. Many of the issues raised in that letter were also included in the appeal statement that was attached to the staff report. So the grounds for appeal in the appeal statement received by staff, number one was that the off-site parking would be inconsistent with the zoning code, with the specific plan, and with the general plan. The second grounds for appeal was that the project doesn't qualify for exemption under the California Environmental Quality Guidelines, 15183 and 15332, which were invoked for the project's approval before the Planning Commission. Regarding the first grounds for appeal, the appeal statement makes the case that the off-site parking facility should be treated as a commercial parking facility. That type of land use does not appear in the land use tables of the zoning code. Staff did take this into consideration during its initial review of the project, and the determination was made that off-site parking is not regulated under Division 2 of the zoning code, which talks about specific land uses such as parking facilities, restaurants, hotels. It's instead governed by Division 3, which talks about site planning and general development regulations. These include things such as signs, circulation, driveways, parking lots, and landscaping. It is not uncommon in downtown Santa Rosa to find developments that cross lot lines, that cross zoning district boundaries, and even have components of the full development that are not contiguous with the primary use of the site. For that reason, staff made the determination that the off-site parking, which is regulated by Division 3, that's where the discussion of the conditional use permit appears, was a component of the overall hotel development, not a separate standalone land use to be compared to the land use tables which appear in Division 2. So because it's considered a component of the development, the hotel itself is permitted by right in the location that it is located at 210 5th Street, and that hotel is consistent with the zoning, with the general plan, and with the downtown station area specific plan. The off-site parking component is part of that use, which is consistent with all of those above-mentioned plans. In fact, the two developments that are immediately north and south of the hotel use have driveways and landscaping and parking lots that cross over their parcel boundaries, and also in some cases over the zoning district boundaries. And those were not reviewed independently of the primary use that went before the various review authorities, including the Design Review Board and the Planning Commission. The second grounds for appeal was that the project does not qualify for exemption under the California Environmental Quality Act. The two findings made by the Planning Commission were that pursuant to the provision of Section 11832, the project was consistent with the general plan, the zoning, and with the downtown station area specific plan for which environmental impact reports had been prepared, and therefore additional environmental review is not required. Additionally, under a Class 32 infill exemption, the hotel project and all of its components, including off-site parking, were exempt from further environmental review. The California Government Code identifies the Planning Commission as the authority for implementation of general plans, as well as administration of specific plans and zoning ordinances. In their resolution approving the hotel and the off-site parking use, the Planning Commission found that the project was consistent with the general plan, with the zoning, and with the specific plan, and therefore there is no conflict with the CEQA guidelines in the approval of this project. Just to go a little bit more specifically into those CEQA exemptions, or one is a provision that allows for no additional environmental review. The other is a categorical exemption, saying that it meets these criteria and therefore additional review pursuant to CEQA is not required. And these findings are supported by an arborist report, by a biological assessment, by historic resources studies, and traffic impact studies that were prepared for this project. Issues that were looked at by staff include what would happen if there were modifications to design as a result of this hearing, as well as the allowable land uses and plan consistency. At this time, staff has no outstanding issues with the project, it should be noted. Regarding modification to design, if as a result of the hearing today there are changes to the hotel design For instance, if additional parking were required on site, that would require changes to the design that was already approved by the Design Review Board and the Cultural Heritage Board, and may require the project to return to those boards for changes. And regarding the allowable land uses, staff does look very closely at the goals and priorities of our general plan and our specific plans. And the determination has been made as we've undergone review of this project that the goals that would be furthered by allowing off-site parking for this use far outweighed any type of conflict that would be provided by providing off-site parking on the use up on 6th Street. Additionally, the approval of the off-site parking program does not preclude any other type of development from the parcel that's between the off-ramp and the highway. If in the future additional off-site parking is not required by the hotel, if we move more into this transit-oriented development that the city would like to see, that use permit could be amended to free up those spaces for other types of uses or to eliminate the need to have those off-site parking spaces at all. Additionally, if that parcel is developed into some other form of development, a mixed-use housing development, for instance, the only requirement would be that it provide those approximately 100 parking spaces to be used by the hotel in addition to any other parking that's provided on site. So because staff and the Planning Commission have found that the project is consistent with our specific plans and our zoning code and advances many of the goals and policies of those plans, it's recommended by Planning and Economic Development staff and by the Planning Commission that the council by resolution deny the appeal and approve a conditional use permit for off-site parking for the Santa Rosa AC Hotel. It should also be noted that some modifications were made to the draft resolution that was provided to council. There were some references to the Planning Commission that have now been updated to reflect that it's the council being addressed in that resolution. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Streeter. Before we go too much deeper into this is a appeal hearing, and council members, if you've had ex parte communications, these need to be disclosed at this point.
I have had a conversation with the applicant that is bringing the appeal, but no new information outside of this presentation.
I've also met with the representative of the developer, and additional information that wasn't consistent is presented today.
Thank you.
I've met with the applicant of the appeal, Mr. Hudson, and I believe that I did learn some information that is not included in the materials thus far regarding the history of other permit applications on the site.
Mr. Tibbetts.
So I met with Ms. Kapolchek, the representative of the AC Marriott, as well as Mr. Bennett and Mr. Hudson from the appellant side.
Mr. Alvarez.
Thank you. I did meet with representatives of the project and did not obtain any new information.
And I met with representatives of the appellant and with representatives of the applicant for the hotel, and did not receive any new information. And we'll ask Mr. Sawyer when he gets back. Ms. Cisco, Chair of the Planning Commission, would you like to address the council on this matter?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Patty Cisco, Chair of the Planning Commission, here tonight to describe the Planning Commission's process in reviewing this conditional use permit with a parking reduction. So on June 22nd, we heard the matter of this conditional use permit for the off-site parking and the parking reduction to support the already approved by right AC Hotel. At the time of the hearing, we did have before us the June 19th opposition letter submitted by the now appellant, and which is now recites the basis of the points on appeal. The commission also had Mr. Streeter's memo, point-by-point response to that opposition letter, as well as his staff report to clarify staff's analysis of consistency with the general plan. And that memo, it further clarified staff's analysis of the project's consistency with the zoning code, downtown station area plan, general plan, for the benefit of the commission and the public. Commission questions further clarified the definition of a parking facility, the exclusion of residential housing, the constraints of the 6th Street lot in terms of housing development, and also clarified the route of to the off-site parking and how the valet parking would operate. Our public hearing lasted about 15 minutes with speakers mainly speaking to the overall concerns of Railroad Square parking as opposed to the project itself. In fact, most initially stayed there in support of the project being the AC Hotel, but concerns about Railroad Square parking. The appellant was the only opponent referring back to his extensive letter and the project's inconsistency with our zoning code and planning documents. In our discussion, planning commissioners acknowledged the complexity of the analysis of the project, and the majority agreed that findings could be made to support the conditional use permit for off-site parking and a parking reduction. All agreed that the matter of parking in general in Railroad Square needs to be taken up independent of this project. In our discussion, suggestions were made to the applicant to continue to explore options that the applicant mentioned relative to shared parking at the mall for their employees, shuttles to and from the airport for hotel visitors. There was one commissioner voting no, and in his discussion, he indicated he could find that the project was an infill project exempt from CEQA, could find that a parking reduction was warranted and that the project did not fit the definition of parking facility. He could not, however, make the findings of consistency, stating that for him there was an insurmountable obstacle of the fact that our planning documents had indicated residential uses required, and he intimated that a general plan amendment might have been a better vehicle for him to vote yes on this project. So with that, we made our approvals, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Ms. Cisco.
Great.
Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I just need to report on, as far as ex parte communication, I did not meet with the applicant. I did not meet with the appellant. I did visit the site of the proposed parking.
Thank you. We're going to give the appellant and the applicant a chance to make presentations. These are limited to 5 minutes, and the appellant will go first.
Clerk, I'm going to use this a little bit later. Took me forever to know how to use this. Okay. Not that tall. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Ty Hudson. I'm the appellant, representing the appellant Unite Here, Local 2850. The appeal before you this evening is really a straightforward question about consistency with the zoning code and the general plan. And it concerns the limits of the discretion of the staff and the Planning Commission in interpreting, administering the city's land use policies. In simple terms, that limit is that the city cannot ignore a clear and unambiguous requirement of the general plan or the zoning code in order to approve a project that conflicts with that requirement, even if the project is otherwise desirable. The staff report in front of you made an effort to confuse the issue, but it really is as simple as that. As our appeal clearly states, the problematic portion of the project is the off-site parking and its consistency or inconsistency with the zoning and general plan designations that apply to that site. As as you know, it's a conditional use permit, and in order to issue a conditional use permit, the city must make the following findings, among others. One, the proposed use is allowed within the applicable zoning district and complies with all other applicable provisions of the zoning code and the city code. And two, the proposed use is consistent with the general plan and any applicable specific plan. In this case, neither of those findings can be made. First, the question of whether the proposed use is allowed within the zoning district. The hotel is an allowed use at the location where it's proposed, which is in the Transit Village Mixed Use Zoning Designation. However, the location of the proposed parking facility is in a different zoning district, Transit Village Residential, where parking facility, public or commercial, is not an allowed use. I want to point out that the parking lot fits squarely into the definition of parking facility, public or commercial. Parking lots or structures operated by the city or a private entity providing parking for a fee. The applicant stated on the record in the Planning Commission hearing that the hotel would charge a fee for parking. This definition distinguishes commercial parking facilities from ordinary accessory parking that might be included with a project and provided free of charge to customers, employees, or residents. The staff has argued that it's not a conditional, doesn't meet the definition of parking facility because it's not a standalone primary land use, but that concept is that's not based on anything in the definition that the code provides for parking facility. It's essentially an arbitrary distinction that amounts to an abuse of discretion should it be relied upon. For the sake of argument, however, let's assume that they're right, that it's not a parking facility, but just a component of the hotel project. In this case, you have to evaluate it as such, and it turns out that hotel is not an allowed use in the Transit Village Residential Zoning District either. Basically the staff can't have it both ways. It's got to be either a hotel or a commercial parking facility, or perhaps both. In either case, it's not allowed in that zoning district. So turning our attention to the other applicable provisions of the zoning code, this is where the project's inconsistency gets even more unambiguous and undeniable, if that's even possible. Section 20-22.050D states the following regarding the Transit Village Residential Zoning District. Quote, residential required. Each new development shall be a residential project. And it goes on to describe that in more detail, but doesn't modify that requirement, which is a restatement of section 20-22.020D, which states the purpose of the Transit Village Residential Zoning District and states clearly residential uses are required. And there's simply no way that the proposed parking lot can be squared with that requirement. As such, you can't make the finding that this project complies with all other requirements of the code. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to have to cut this down a little bit, but suffice it to say that page 4-10 of the Downtown Station Area Specific Plan and page 2-11 of the General Plan describe the requirements of the Transit Village Medium Land Use Designation, and also say that residential use is required. There's no qualification in that requirement. There's no ambiguity at all. And again, in some, the exemptions that are claimed, the CEQA exemptions that are claimed, both rely on consistency with zoning and the general plan and any applicable specific plan, and so they can't be applied to this project either. Thank you.
Thank you.
Turned out
We will now hear from the applicant. Ms. Kowalczyk.
Thank you. Mayor Corsi and members of the City Council, Jean Kopolchak, 843 2nd Street, Land Use Consultant for AC Hotel. With me tonight also is Jeff Blackman, project applicant. He would also like to address the council at the conclusion of my presentation.
Ms. Kolchak, before you get started, I've got my script here that says the applicant presentation will be 5 minutes. Is that combined between the two of you?
I will speak quickly. Thank you. I did not time this presentation.
And the developer is also welcome to speak during the public hearing too.
Okay, thank you. As indicated by staff, the project is the AC Hotel. This is a shot of the hotel at the intersection of 4th Street and Davis. This is a shot of the hotel, a perspective of the hotel at the intersection of 5th and Davis. However, this project is, the hotel itself is not before you tonight, but the project before you this evening is an appeal of the hotel's adjunct parking program to be located at 201 6th Street. Irrespective of the claims in the appeal, this proposal, which is not a standalone public parking lot, but an adjunct to the AC Hotel project, is in compliance with the necessary zoning regulations. Those regulations which appear on the screen, the two conditions being adjacency and a covenant. Also allowed, the total amount of parking can be less restrictive than required by the zoning ordinance if backed up by a parking study. This was done in this case, as you saw from staff's presentation, a reduction to 124 spaces, and we are providing 126. Also, I think of interest is the section in the downtown station area-specific plan that in fact supports alternative methods of parking. Essentially, the value of encouraging alternative methods of parking is that it allows an intensification of the primary site, and this is exactly what is happening on this project. This slide shows the relationship, so you see the adjacency. It's approximately 340 feet away. And when you look at the site itself, given its shape, topography, and location, the site is a constrained site. The use of this site for an AC hotel parking program is a reasonable use for the site. This slide shows the site in relationship to its neighbors, addressing the issue of compatibility. We believe the use is compatible. To address that issue, in the site plan, we retained a number of the large trees. We're providing security fencing and lighting, as well as a landscape buffer around the edges. As indicated by staff, in order to support a CEQA exemption, there needed to be a determination that there were no environmental effects. We, to that end, an arborist report, biotic report, cultural resources report, traffic report were completed, all attesting to no significant environmental effects. The use of off-site parking for primary uses is not new in the city of Santa Rosa. This table shows some of the uses within the city of Santa Rosa that have off-site parking. You will see that parking does fall on residentially designated districts. In summary, we believe that the proposal before you meets all of the requirements of the zoning code, is a reasonable use for the physically constrained site, furthers the general plan policy to enhance the economic vitality of downtown, is compatible with the surrounding land use, is without environmental constraint, and is not precedent setting. With that, I'd like to invite Jeff Blackman to address you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jeff Blackman with Bedford Lodging. Just really briefly, I wanted to make sure that the council understood or understands the process that we've gone through, and we think we've done the right thing and listened to all the constituencies that had existed, let alone including the neighborhood meetings, meeting with the Railroad Square folks, the Design Review Board, the Cultural Heritage Board, the Planning Commission, all of which, frankly, made a better project. We have a better hotel design than when we started this project because we were open and took input and frankly added dollars to the project, but it's going to be a great hotel. What we're going to do on Davis Street with the restaurant, with the retail space on the corner of 5th and Davis, and fulfilling a lot of the requests that the Railroad Square and the Cultural Heritage Board and the Design Review Board had of the project. Frankly, we're excited about this location, as is Marriott, and its activation of the downtown area. So I appreciate the city's support, and we'll be available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to open the public hearing at this point. I've got a few cards. You don't need to have filled out a card to speak. We'll start with Josh Silvers. He'll be followed by Anita LaFollette.
Mayor, Council, hi, how are you? I'm Josh Silvers. I own the restaurant across from the space, Jackson's Bar and Oven, and I used to own Syrah Restaurant, which is directly across from the 205 5th Street, and I started there in 1999, and the whole time I've been in Railroad Square, I can tell you the houses where the parking has been located have always been problematic for the city. They're always been bad news. The people going in and out of there, we always had problems with them. If there's a hotel going, you know, obviously I have mixed emotions because that's a lot of parking for us to lose across the street. But if there's a hotel, it's a great use of the land to have parking. We in Railroad Square desperately need more parking. We have the train, and we have a new hotel. Plus, the Hyatt has added 100 rooms. So there's more and more in our area. But I would say if there's going to be a hotel, they need the parking, and we desperately need it. And to think that that would be a good use to keep those houses, I would definitely say no. I mean, I've been here, like I said, since 1999, and they've always been hugely problematic. So that's all I really got. Thank you.
Thank you. Anita LaFollette. She'll be followed by Matt Myers.
What we're looking at here is the exact site that I proposed a few months back for a homeless encampment. Everyone here is ignoring the fact that there are tents all along the 6th Street undercrossing where people who don't have any other shelter are living. And I propose to do an encampment here, which would be very wise for you, since the last housing development that I guess you approved, isn't going to house anybody in that area either. Even if I lose my house tomorrow, I will not be able to move into that senior housing, even though I was born and raised here in Sonoma County and had 52 jobs. So you're not solving the homeless problem. And in fact, we have an emergency proclamation, and the two things that come up are here, right here, where we need some porta potties and we need some garbage bins so that we don't have to sweep 6th Street, 5th Street, and 9th Street probably in the next couple of months, because they'll all be coming back from the river soon. And you're not going to do that. You're going to build a parking lot. Now listen, that's so ironic, because right down the street is a huge one. It's called Macy's, right? And all they have to do is get a contract with them and they can park their cars there. Have you ever been through the Macy's parking lot? I have never seen it full. It's right down the street. So, but on top of that, I just want to know why, and I hate sounding like a squeaky old woman, but why in the world did we sit here 5 months ago and talk about the proposal for an encampment, and everyone on this on this council was meeting with developers and knowing exactly what was going to happen to that property. Now, I feel like a silly fool. I've really been deceived. And I'm shocked. You guys were sitting down with developers. You knew all along what was going to happen to that property. And I'm going out there and trying to find out everything that I can, working my buns off so that the people that are living in the undercrossing can have a shelter. This is really astounding, and I feel like I should cry. I'm really ashamed. I don't know what else to say.
Matt Myers, he'll be followed by Thomas Ells.
Good afternoon, Matt Myers, representing North Bay Jobs with Justice. We oppose this hotel project, particularly because it will require an off-site parking lot that would encroach onto a valued residential zoning space within the SMART train station area. Jobs with Justice, along with many other organizations and individuals, pushed hard for the SMART train and for smart, equitable growth centered around the train station in Railroad Square. The downtown station area specific plan reflects a democratic consensus for developing high-density housing within walking distance of the SMART station as a key priority for addressing both climate change and our housing needs. As you well know, better than me, we're in the midst of a housing crisis. The last thing we need is to reduce the availability of land for housing in the train station area by putting a surface parking lot on a half-acre of residentially zoned land. The lot where the hotel parking lot is proposed is zoned Transit Village Residential and explicitly states, the code explicitly states that each new development shall be a residential project. City staff has previously applied this zoning requirement by rejecting a proposal for a coffee shop on the same location because the coffee shop did not include residential units. Since this non-residential parking lot project does not propose a change in these zoning rules, but intends to ignore the rules, I believe the project is in violation of the democratic process which developed the zoning rules in the first place. Now, the developer is indicating there's constraints for residential development on that lot. And I've heard that the city staff doesn't think the property is suitable for residential use because it's next to a freeway and has stated that no developer has expressed interest in developing a residential project there. But there was an application for a 15-unit residential project at this location in 2012. Also, as was mentioned, there's already people living under the freeway overpass immediately adjacent to this lot. Surely no one would think that it's more preferable for folks to live under the freeway rather than live in a residential building next to the freeway. Please ensure that the downtown station area plan and the general plan mean what they say, and that the priority for transit-oriented housing development is real. I hope so. Don't approve a commercial parking lot on valued residentially zoned land. Build affordable housing, and they will come. Thank you.
Thomas Ells.
Wow, this is really interesting. All of our dreams are coming true for the SMART train, and they're coming to build high-density housing. In a way, density-centered growth in the Railroad Square. I think it's good. But I think it's bad to do the parking lot on the other property because it is in a different district. And I'm sure there was a lot of argument about where to set that line and how to set that line when they originally did it and said, this is a transit commercial district and this is a transit residential district. And there are reasons for that. And we need to have the high density housing. We need that. I don't know that you should deny the project, though. But maybe there's a way, because just in the item before this, you had 15.1. And it said here, the units will be for sale, so the project also includes airspace condominium map. What if we have an airspace condominium map over the top of that? You can have residential housing over the top of that. Maybe have them come back to you and talk to you. I don't know if you can approve the one and condition that on the other, because they are kind of separate, but together. This is why they pay you the big money to make the hard decisions. But I would like to see, and you know what we're doing out there for the 6th Street and the 9th Street and 5th Street. And we can't give up the housing. We don't want to deny the project either. So it's really tough. But maybe there's a way to, as I say, airspace condominium or another type of residential development over the top of that. As he said, there were 15 units proposed. I think there's a way. It's tricky, it's difficult, it's got the sound from the freeway, it's right there. But that's what we're talking about, and it's sitting right there with the rail, and guess what? They toot that horn too. Or now they don't. Okay, thanks. I'd like to see residential development there. Maybe there's a way to do both. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it Giles speaker?
Yes, Giles Beaker, Hugh Futrell Corporation, 204th Street, speaking in support of the hotel project and the use of the parcel for ancillary parking. As has been noted, there are many other instances where zoning designations have been crossed for ancillary parking uses. We believe that this is probably a best and highest use for this site. As many of you are aware, Hugh Futrell Corporation has developed hundreds of residential units in Santa Rosa. I can tell you as a developer that this site is wholly unsuited for really any kind of economic development unless there were some substantial subsidy or some other element to it. It is ideally sited for the kind of parking, ancillary parking requirement that the applicant is proposing. It's also kind of a mystery, that one from the outside could take a look at the reasoning for this appeal and wonder how much representation is happening for hotel workers when we're dealing with kind of arcane land use and zoning issues. So, thank you.
That's all the cards I have. You don't need to have filled out a card, though. If you'd like to speak to the council on this, come on down.
Hello, my name is Mike Montague, 422 Wilson Street in Railroad Square. I really hope that you will approve this project with the parking. It is definitely what we need in Railroad Square. The last speaker was 100% right. Can you imagine Johnny and Sue on this proposed parking lot instead being dense housing, living in there by all the smog and the cars? It's just not really good quality of life. There's a lot of dense housing in the future in Railroad Square, which I know all of you know about, along Wilson Street, Smart Property, Sebastopol Road. There's a lot in the plans. So there's going to be plenty of dense housing in the area. I really want to address the homeless encampment because this really, again, is not the right spot for that. You all are working on homeless issues every day, and all of us in Railroad Square really appreciate that. This is not the answer. There's so many other answers which you all know about. Hope you approve this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to address the council on this issue? With that, I'll close the public hearing. The applicant has 3 minutes for rebuttal. Right here it says applicant. Somebody want to explain which one that is, if any?
I believe it should be the appellant, because tonight is unique in that it's the subject of an appeal. So sorry.
The appellant has 3 minutes for rebuttal. Thank you for the clarification.
Now maybe I will use this.
Careful.
Thank you. I'll try not to break it. Promise.
I inspected the clock.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ty Hudson again, the appellant. We've just heard a number of comments about the alleged unsuitability of this site for residential development, and Mr. Myers also alluded to the fact that there was a residential project proposed. I apologize for bringing this as new information, but unfortunately the staff at the Planning Commission hearing misstated the history of this site and claimed that there had never been any developer expressing interest in residential development at this site. There we go. This is a residential development for 15 units that was proposed at that site by the previous property owner in 2012. The application was withdrawn in 2016. The application number, I believe, is DR12-077. Clearly, 15 residential units would fit on this site. Again, it may not be everybody's favorite idea of their ideal place to live, but it's certainly better than living in a tent under the freeway overpass. Furthermore, the year before that was proposed, a coffee shop was proposed at that site, and the planning staff said in one letter, the TVRSA zoning district requires high-density residential development when new development is proposed. And this was in rejecting the application. And then went on to say, in order to develop the site with a commercial project, the site's general plan and zoning designations would need to be changed. So that brings me to my next point, which is that regardless of whether this site is ideal for residential development, that's how it's zoned now. That's what the general plan and the downtown station area and specific plans say. Those documents, the zoning code and the specific and general plan, have the force of law. Those are very clear and unambiguous requirements in those documents. They're not vague and general and aspirational goals, which some important goals of general plans and specific plans are vague and general and aspirational and can be weighed against one another. But this one is actually a clear and unambiguous requirement. And so regardless of whether it's a good spot for residential, we could have that argument if there were a general plan amendment and a zoning code amendment before you, as the commissioner who voted against the project pointed out. That's not before you, and so you got to go with the rules as they stand. Thank you.
Thank you. So, council, do we have questions for anyone? Mr. Tibbetts, go ahead.
So I do have a question for our planning staff. I was recently in a talk with an organization, and I won't name who because it's premature, who's looking at a new development that is in very close proximity to the freeway. And one of the concerns that they raised during this conversation was that they were in close proximity to vehicle emissions and particulate matter, and there was some type of setback from the freeway that was causing them to make a decision about their project that kept them away from the freeway. And was that just something that they're being mindful of, given maybe just the fact that they want to have a strong residential project where people aren't close to that sort of particulate matter? Or is there actually any Caltrans code that we're aware of that limits or restricts in some way new residential development close to a freeway?
So typically with development, as it undergoes the review pursuant to California Environmental Quality Act, there's a study which is called an initial study. It looks at several different categories for any type of new development. One of those is air quality. And so there are standards for particulate matter for residential developments, for instance, and there are thresholds that have been established for distance from major arterials or highways and the associated air quality impacts. And so that may have been what they were referring to.
I think it was. Do you know the district distance requirement, or is it based on the level of particulate matter in the air?
I don't have those details for you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Other questions? Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, I'm just hoping staff can respond a little bit to the coffee shop and the 15-unit project in 2012. Both, if you can shed a little bit more light on what those projects were and why they were denied, and then also why that was not included in the conversation at the Planning Commission.
So those two developments did occur prior to 2012. And from our research on those projects, the coffee shop had an issues letter prepared for it, which said that the district does not allow that standalone use of a commercial development. And regarding the 15-unit multifamily, that project was also submitted for design review to the city, and an issues letter was generated based on review from city staff. And after that issues letter was sent to the applicant, there was no further action on that until several years later when they decided to withdraw the project. So that's the history on those two projects. Regarding the staff's position of the coffee shop without a residential component not being allowed, that is again falling into those two divisions of the zoning code that were mentioned previously. A coffee shop would be its standalone land use, similar to a commercial parking facility would be a standalone land use that's not allowed in that district without some mixed use component. Regarding the parking that's proposed as part of the conditional use permit associated with this hotel, staff did look at it as Division 3, which talks about driveway signs, fences, walls, hillside development. All of those have some sort of entitlement associated with them, but they're not treated as standalone. So if you have landscaping that's going to cross over into a residential district, it's not assessed as a park, which would require some kind of residential. It's looked at as landscaping that's associated with that primary use. So that's the primary difference between the coffee shop and this off-site parking program. And yes, with the multifamily development, it would appear that it was the applicant's decision to stop pursuing that after the issues letter was sent out.
So I want to make sure I understand you correctly. So part of the argument for why this would be allowed but the coffee shop would not is that the parking lot is more treated as landscaping than it is as another entity.
It's treated as site planning and general development regulation. So it's not being assessed as a parking facility. It's being assessed as a component of this hotel development that's proposed for 210 Fifth Street.
So on slide 16, you may have glossed over it a little bit. Are these sites around Santa Rosa that are components of the development that was approved where the parking is off-site from it? And if so, what was the land use designation for some of these sites? Is this a consistent interpretation of land use policy across the city? Because from what it sounds like, the site that we're talking about for parking is zoned for residential.
So that is correct, the assessment that it's been consistently implemented in this way in the past. So if I can draw your attention to the upper right picture, that is the parking, that is the required parking for the development across the street on Tupper. And so that's an off-site parking lot. It is in an R3 residential high-density multifamily district. And so there was no requirement that that parking lot be assessed independently from the residential building across the street. So that's a case where it's been implemented. On the top left and the bottom right, there are driveways, which are also under the control of Division 3, which cross over boundaries and also go against or front on some of the shop front street types in the zoning code. So the code would require for those that if it was new development, that they be developed with activity generating uses such as retail at the street level, if that driveway or that parking were looked at as an independent brand new land use or new development. Instead, it's looked at as a component of the overall project.
Excuse me, Mr. Rogers, can I follow up on that question? Do any of these were any of these projects approved after we decided that housing was our #1 priority, or after the adoption of the station area plan?
I do not have information on when those different projects were approved.
Most of them seem to be aged. I'm sorry, Mr. Rogers, for the interruption.
Nope, it's fine. Give me a chance to process. What I'm struggling with here, trying to understand, the designation clearly is residential. And the station area plan and the general plan clearly call for residential. So what I'm trying to figure out here, and maybe some of my colleagues can help weigh in, is the consistency of the application of this section 3 as opposed to section 2, and trying to weigh whether that's actually inconsistent with our general plan and the station area plan. I'll probably have more questions or more comments, but I'd like to listen a little bit more to the discussion first.
Ms. Combs.
Thank you for bringing this interesting puzzle to us. First, I want to say that I know that our city has a need for hotels, and I'm very interested in seeing hotels built in our city. But I do have some questions about the parking situation for this hotel. It was my understanding from Urban 3 and the Smart Towns processes that we've been talking about that flat street parking was in fact not desirable for a city, particularly in downtown areas. And that, so I'm wondering if we have decided to change from that orientation, or is our interest in our downtown land to be not street level parking in general? Don't we have a kind of general approach that we would like to not have street level parking because it's not really a good use of the rare resource of our city land with the boundaries that we have, with the way that our cities are growing. It seems an odd choice that we would be bringing forward street parking. So,
yes, without a doubt, the vision for our downtown is to build up, not to build out. And so this would be considered an interim or underutilized use of this space, but necessary to support the current project. And it was found not to preclude that ultimate vision for the city, which is unequivocally an urban center for our city that is multi-storied and makes the most efficient use of our property.
okay.
Or of the land in the core.
So as a follow-up to that, do we have information about attempts that were made to seek contracts with available parking garages, either city or private parking garages in the area? Do we have that information? Do we know if attempts were made?
The applicant did make attempts to identify parking solutions in various different areas, including the parking garage across the street at the mall, or across the highway at the mall, as well as city facilities. And I'm sure the applicant can expand on that if he's able to.
Briefly.
So a little bit of context. When we looked at this site initially for the hotel, we started looking at the parking needs for the project and wanted to understand, A, what they were, and B, what we were going to do about it. The initial idea, which makes a ton of sense, and I think someone mentioned it earlier, was to go to Simon Malls and have a long-term parking lease with them. A couple issues came up with that. One is they needed major tenant approval to enter into a lease long enough to satisfy our lenders, and they just couldn't get that major tenant approval from their larger lessees. So that brought us back to going for a more permanent solution, which is when we found this site. So we have looked at other opportunities, none of which I think are ideal for the hotel from a valet perspective, only because of the time it takes to get to the off-site lots and back to the hotel. We're not sure it would be the ideal service concept for our guests.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My understanding is that this land will in some way be deeded for this. How do you view that as temporary if the concept is that surface lots should be temporary?
So the way that the conditional use permit for off-site parking works is that there's a deed restriction requiring the number of parking spaces to be provided, even if the property should change hands in the future. In this case, I think it would be approximately 100 parking spaces.
So the deed will say that it has to hold 100 parking spaces.
Correct.
So I'm trying to understand how that's a temporary use since our city wants not to have surface parking.
So two ways that could change. One, if the hotel is not generating anywhere near that demand and finds that it's no longer valuable to hang on to those 100 parking spaces, they can apply for a modification to that use permit. So if the hotel is able to make use of proximity to the airport and to transit, and there's no longer a need for this off-site parking, the use permit could be modified to eliminate those required parking spaces and erase it from the deed restriction, or to reduce that number. Additionally, if that parcel were to be developed in the future, there's no limitation on the development that could happen on that parcel, provided 100 spaces are provided to satisfy the needs of the hotel. So if something were proposed that does go vertically and parking supply is provided in that development, 100 of those spaces would have to go to the hotel, or some modified number if the future need is less. So those are the two ways that it could change in the future.
Is the site included in our RENA housing report as a housing site?
We don't have that information right now.
Okay. I think that would be useful to know if we're reporting to the state that this is in fact a site we plan to use for housing. And I would like to know that. My understanding, if I've heard you correctly, this is a hotel that is allowed by right, but a hotel isn't allowed by right in Transit Village Residential. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So is it a parking lot or is it a hotel in Transit Village Residential District?
It is an off-site parking program. So the parking lot is a component of that program, as is the valet pickup location, as is the circulation that the vehicles will use to get from the staging area and over to the...
So it's an accessory of the hotel?
Correct.
Okay, so does that make this a hotel site by right?
No.
Okay, so...
So the analogy I was using earlier about landscaping or driveways crossing into different districts, this would be treated the same way. So the circulation is not treated to see whether hotels are allowed in public right-of-way. It's part of the program that's serving the hotel that's in the public right-of-way.
Okay.
The parking lot would be serving the valet program, serving the hotel, and the hotel is proposed for a site where it's permitted by right.
So just to make sure I understand, we have a zoning rule 20-22.02D and a second statement 22.050D, both of which state there should be residential, possibly even state high-density residential. We have a station area plan, page 4-10, that has residential required, and we have a general plan 2-11 that shows residential required. And you're suggesting to us that it is appropriate for us to do a surface lot, even though we view ourselves as having both a housing crisis and that we don't like to have surface lots. So I'm puzzled at having this come forward in this way, especially if we don't know whether or not it's included in our RENA housing listing. Can I just verify two things that I thought I heard in testimony? Have we ever had a residential use proposed for this site? It said 2012, I think, that there was a 15-unit project. I just want to confirm, have we had a residential use proposed?
Yes, there have been residential uses proposed. None have been entitled.
Okay, and have we ever turned down a project on the site because it did not include residential?
I believe that's the case.
Okay.
Well, it was an issue that was raised for a project. It wasn't denied because it never went to a review authority.
We were shown a letter. Is that letter a letter from our department?
I believe that was an issues letter, and one of the issues was that there was no residential proposed.
Okay. So we're not denying the existence of that letter. It's a real letter. All right. Why don't...
And just to follow up to that, processes have changed in this
Yes.
department considerably since some of these letters were issued, which include a pre-application meeting to work through issues, so we simply don't issue letters before sitting down and having conversations about projects. I want to make sure that's on the record for everybody to hear in the community. There have been process changes subsequent to 2012.
Thank you. I do have a little concern, though, about the fairness of turning one project down and then going forward with a project that has...
I'm not disputing that,
Okay.
but I want to make sure it's clear that the process has changed.
And I want to very much appreciate the process improvements that have been made in this department. Why is it that we don't have a general plan amendment or a zoning plan amendment before us? Because that would seem to me to be a real natural approach to this problem.
That would be the case if staff's analysis had concluded that a parking facility was being proposed. But the analysis that staff went through, working with the applicant, was that a hotel was proposed for the 210 5th Street, and that hotel had components to it, including an off-site parking program, which is subject to a conditional use permit. And so the conditional use permit is the controlling factor on off-site parking. And so that was the entitlement that was relayed to the applicant that they would be required.
Will the zoning on this site remain residential?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
I needed to provide more clarification. I did find it in our general plan housing element. The site is specifically listed as a potential housing site that might fulfill our RENA numbers at particularly this half-acre portion of the site.
Thank you very much for that.
Further questions? Mr. Schwab.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think you answered it, but I just wanted clarification, because partially where I'm struggling here is the 35-year history of this site, and to say it's appropriate for housing just with 30 years of experience there, it seems very challenging for me. But if one were to come forward, a developer were to come forward and say, I want to build 25 units there, as long as they provided about 102 parking units on that site as part of the project, that could still be residential. Is that what I think on slide 11 said, parking covenant that runs with the land?
That's correct.
It's not prohibited. It still can be done.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Tibbetts.
On page 6, section 3, the bottom paragraph, it says, if in the future parking demand for the hotel should decline, the operator may amend this use permit to develop some or all of the off-street parking lot or to enter into an agreement with the city's parking division to utilize surplus spaces. And we heard about Simon, and I'm sorry to hear that fell through, because to me, that would have been the best use. That's a grossly underutilized and overparked facility, in my opinion. But with regard to the city, have conversations begun with the city where you could have parking that would fit your needs? But I think you mentioned that it was a little bit far away and unfit for the valet, I guess, going back and forth. Okay. I think is it possible, I guess this will be my question, then I'll have a comment later, but is it possible then to structure a conditional use permit that still gives deference to housing? Because I do believe that this is the council's priority in the future. And could we direct staff to sit down with the applicant and come up with some type of a conditional use permit that gives them the value out of the parking lot that they need, while still not booting out our needed residential TDR zoning? I mean, personally, I look at that property and I think from a development perspective, that is a less than ideal property. And I don't foresee housing being proposed there in the future. However, I don't want to cut that opportunity out for us. The other opportunity I don't want to see get cut out for us is the opportunity for a multi-story parking facility for SMART. Now, I know that Rome Corporation is coming in. I assume there'll be a parking component proposed with that development, but the area may be underparked in the future. So there's a lot of variables at play here for the space, and I think Councilmember Combs also brought up a good point about having this flat parking space that frankly does not conform with our objectives to be a high-density city.
Okay, question?
I'm sorry, well, I heard a question in there, so I would like to
I'm sorry,
respond.
it went right past me.
So,
Please.
Council member, so yes, you have many options before you tonight, and I know this is a complicated one. We spent some time on it ourselves. So what's before you tonight is an appeal of a conditional use permit for off-site parking. So it's a use permit that's on appeal. So with that, you can, there's the simple directions. You can accept the appeal and deny the proposal before you. That would end the process. They would reapply or rethink of their next steps in terms of moving the hotel forward. And certainly staff would work with them, and the parking district would work with them to see whether options are available for them. Another option that you have before you is you can amend the conditional use permit the way it's conditioned. That works well when it's some minor alterations, but if it's real substantive, another option before you is to send staff back and the applicant back with some direction, and we can work on some resolution of issues and continue the item and come back with those resolutions or the effort that we would conduct. So those are several options before you tonight. You can approve the project as presented, deny the project as presented, amend the use permit, or send us back to work on specific issues.
Thank you.
Follow-up question then, what would the timeline be to actually work this through? Because I'm worried about delaying the process.
The delay would be significant with the other things that the council is wrestling with.
Mr. Rogers, you had another question?
Yeah, and forgive me, I don't want to be beating a dead horse. This council has previously entered into an agreement with another entity on a valet program utilizing city lots. And so I have not yet heard a good reason for why that is not an option, other than just being told that that's not an option. So perhaps if staff could expand on that, or if the applicant could expand on that, what in particular makes that a challenge? And then also, while you're up here answering a question, if you could talk a little bit about your employee parking as well, where your employees will park.
Also, I want to remind the City Council, we do have staff from the City Parking Department here, Kim Nadeau. She can also respond to that question.
Go ahead.
Quickly, the off-site parking that has been in discussion is frankly on the edge of being just too far from the hotel to service the guests. The big thing with there's good valet technology out there in the hotel business now. You can text your ticket number and it'll tell you to come down in 10 or 12 minutes. But to have someone have to run 5 or 6 blocks from the hotel underneath the 101 to the other side is just, is just not feasible. So ironically, we landed on this site for parking because of listening to the neighborhood associations and the Railroad Square folks about their concern for parking. So I want to make sure you understand we were listening to the neighborhood by thinking we were doing the right thing by taking a site that's clearly been uneconomic for anything else and cleaning it up, lighting it, landscaping it. It's right at the exit of the 101, so it's really got little economic value to anything else. We talked about putting a welcome to Railroad Square, welcome to Santa Rosa.
I think you've answered the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait, sorry, the second question as well, about employee parking lot.
Sorry.
On the employee side, we do have a relationship with Simon, and they are willing to enter into 10 to 15 spaces for employee parking on a limited basis. So the restriction before was we needed 100 spaces from them. They couldn't free up that many with their master tenants, but they could free up 15 to 20. I'm actually in the process of buying another piece of land from Simon Malls in Denver, so we're working out that simultaneously for employee parking.
Okay, let's get a motion on the table and we can continue discussion unless there are more questions.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to check if our own parking folks wanted to make a comment about it. Parking availability. I just wanted to give them an opportunity to express their work on parking.
Thank you, Kim Nadeau, parking manager. So as far as the distinction of valet, I think as Mr. Blackman said, it's proximity. I know for the Empire Building, the valet agreement, they're much closer to Garage on First Street where they're planning on doing valet. So I think that was the distinction there. The only other thing I might share with you is that we recently did do a parking study for all of the downtown, and the results of that were that right now our parking supply meets our demand, even in Railroad Square. So what the big unknown is what's going to happen with SMART, and as you know, we are working to make arrangements to accommodate SMART users with the upcoming shuttle that will easily transport people from our underutilized garages to Railroad Square. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to mitigate that. But right now our supply does meet our demand. And they did take into consideration with that study this hotel project. So that was included in that.
Thank you.
Mayor Corsi, if I could just interrupt before the council begins discussion. The staff does have a possible condition in response to Councilmember Tippett's suggestion earlier. In order to memorialize the council's desire to see residential development on that site, a potential additional condition added to the use permit could be any modifications to this conditional use permit or proposal to develop shall be subject to the provisions of the TVR zoning district, which includes a requirement for residential uses, just as an advisory condition that memorializes that intent.
Yes, Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I do like that approach, and I'll tell you why. We've had a couple of conversations up here a few months ago about the potential changing of the railroad stationary plan into more TVR and removing some of the zoning overlay. And I know we're not talking about the same zoning overlay, but it's been clear that housing has been the focus since that was established, I think, in 2010. And I think it's clearly still the focus now. To me, it is an underactivated space, and in land use planning, I'd love to think that our responsibility is to activate space. So for that reason, I'm supportive of this moving forward, but I do want to protect the possibility for that to become housing in the future, and I think that achieves it well.
Mr. Sawyer, I think you have the item. Do you want to put a motion on the table?
Sure. And Mr. Streeter, could you restate that condition for me?
Yes, for the record, it is any modification to this conditional use permit or proposal to development shall be subject to the provisions of the TVR zoning district, which includes a requirement for residential uses.
Thank you. Well, I'll make a comment and I'll introduce the resolution. If anyone who's been watching over the last number of years actually knows that I have been a big fan of housing in, at least looking at opportunity sites in our downtown. And many of those are surface lots, surface parking lots, which I think are underutilized, and in the future will be some exciting projects, perhaps being able to use that space as our the profile of our downtown changes. This site, however, would not rise to the level of importance that many of our other sites would. I think that the amendment that you're suggesting honors the current zoning and also provides an opportunity for this project to go forward. Hotels are in Santa Rosa. We need the hotel rooms. I mean, that's really clear for a number of reasons. It is something that we lack. We lack a lot of things, and housing, of course, is one of them. Hotels is another that we lack, and I think having that condition, and I would add that to my resolution, speaks to the possible need in the future, and also would allow, perhaps, depending on the vote of the council, to have this project move forward, and also getting rid of what has been a problem piece of property for quite some time. So with that, at least to get something on the table, I will introduce a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa denying an appeal and making findings and determinations and approving a conditional use permit for off-site parking with a parking reduction for the Santa Rosa AC Hotel by Marriott, located at 210 5th Street, our APN number 010-071-012 and 201 Street. Assessors parcel number 010-086-008 and 010-086-014, file number CUP17-031, with the additional amendment suggested by Mr. Streeter, and waive further reading.
Second.
Sorry, that would be the further condition offered by Mr.
Yes, the condition, sorry, as opposed to amendment, with the condition suggested by Mr. Streeter.
Yes, Mr. Tibbetts.
Councilmember, if I may, I am concerned with some of the language in that condition. So I'm going to be, while you discuss, I'm going to be playing with it a little bit. So let me see what I can do.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Tibbetts.
Quick point of clarification, so I don't screw this up. Is the for vote meaning we uphold the appeal? Is a no vote we deny the appeal?
The motion is to deny.
Okay, thank you.
Comments? Want to start? Okay. Mr. Sweathelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for this presentation. There's, so much information on these complex projects, and it's not your standard. As I'm learning, these land uses, nothing are standard. But, one of staff's recommendations saying there is no outstanding issues. I appreciate all the efforts and all the exploration of all the different angles on this type of complex land use. But the bottom line for me, I think it is the best use for this property. Again, going 35 years working in the city in that property, I agree with some of my colleagues that Service Streets is not what we're looking for, but for that lot, I think there's some challenges there right now that this Service Street is going to be an improvement about what we have here, so I'll be very much in support of this project.
Ms. Combs?
I'm very uncomfortable with establishing a Transit Village residential zoning district, zoning specific plans, general plans, and then not following through with them. I have a lot of concern about a habit we have of sort of instituting a plan and then not going there. It concerns me that this is one of our arena sites, and I don't hear a proposal for an alternative location to meet these needs. It concerns me that there's a fairness issue to me that we have turned down a project at that site because it wasn't residential. I think that we should be doing this with regard to a general plan amendment. I'm concerned about the traffic studies, so I will not be supporting this item. Although I have to say that I would love to see the hotel find another solution including working with our parking.
Ms. Tibbetts.
So I think that the space as it stands, if there were another pre-housing project in the pre-application phase, that I would uphold the appeal that you brought forward, Mr. Hudson, and I think the information that you brought forward is really good and was important to help us refocus this on housing, because that is the objective, I think, for all of us down in the station area plan. But I would also like to, and I want to thank staff for coming up with that caveat, because I think it is very important that we do memorialize it. This space is going to change dramatically in the next 10 years. I expect to see more residential uses. In the short term, we may even experience more demand for parking as a result of SMART being there. And I see this actually as an opportunity for a city parking facility that would be revenue generating. But right now, none of that's on the table, and this is. So I'm willing to support this project going forward.
Any comments? Mr. Hodgman.
Yeah, I do want to support the hotel project, but for me, cutting through the noise, what I'm struggling with is that this is clearly inconsistent with the general plan, is clearly inconsistent with the station area plan. And if I felt comfortable that all other options had been exhausted in finding a way to do the parking, I would feel much more comfortable moving forward, especially given the amendment. I think that that's just what it comes down to for me once we cut through the noise, is that it is inconsistent. And what is the point of asking neighbors and asking the public to weigh in on what they'd like to see in an area if we're going to continue to ignore it? So I will be voting against the motion.
I want to see this hotel built. I think it's a good project. I like the project, and I think it's what Railroad Square needs. But I feel like we're going through all kinds of gyrations to make it happen that are not necessarily consistent with what our rules are and with what our priorities are. It bothers me a lot that we claim this piece of property as part of our regional housing needs assessment inventory, and we're willing to turn it into a parking lot. If it wasn't part of RENA, and if it was rezoned, and I may support a rezoning on it, but right now it says that it's residential. We've told people in the past that it's going to be residential or nothing. And the condition that's put forward is that we're going to be really serious about residential in the future, but not right now. I'm just not willing to go there. So with that, we have a motion and a second. Did you want to weigh in on the
Yes,
condition?
we do have some alternative language for the condition. Okay, the condition for your consideration is nothing in this conditional use permit shall prevent future development of the site for residential uses consistent with the underlying Transit Village medium designation and TVRSA zoning district of this site.
It's acceptable to me.
And my second.
Does that cause any more need for discussion? Your votes, council.
Wait, this is to deny the appeal. A yes is denying the appeal.
So the appeal is denied on a 4-3 vote. The no votes are, try not to confuse things. The support for the denial of the appeal is Mr. Oliveris, Schwedhelm, Tibbetts, and Sawyer. Thank you. If I can find my agenda. Here we are. Mr. McGlynn, written communications.
Yes. 16.1 is the settlement agreement with CVSR Holdings. And item 16.2 is the responses to 2 grand jury reports. If this is a time to have any discussion on the answers that are provided, if there is any wish to do so.
Council? I don't see any microphones going on. Thank you very much. Do we have any cards? I'm sorry, 16.2? Oh, sorry.
That's only for action if it's required.
It sounds like it's required. So we need to have a motion to approve the response to the grand jury report?
I move to authorize that.
Okay, so it says authorize.
Is correct. The agenda is to authorize the mayor to sign.
I moved, thank you.
Your votes. Sorry?
I made the motion to authorize the mayor.
And a second from Mr. Sawyer. And your votes.
Thank you.
And that has 7 ayes.
And
we
thank
don't
you.
have any more cards, Ms. Gomez? Okay. I'm sorry?
You still texting?
I gotta let daycare know that I'm running late. They charge if you're late. And I'm not usually one of those people to text and drive, and I was almost done with my text when that car came out of nowhere.
You still veered in oncoming traffic. And that text message, it never got through.
One text or call could wreck it all.